燃え上がれガンダム。Hello and welcome to Weekly Suit Gundam, the special bonus podcast brought to you by the folks at the Weekly Stuff Podcast. I am Sean Chapman.
And I'm Jonathan Lack.
And we are here once again to dive into the wacky and wild world of Gundam with the second season of Mobile Suit Gundam 00, or as we all love and know it by, 00 Gundam.
00 Gundam, indeed. Sean, I love this show to fucking death.
It is fantastic, Jonathan.
Yes. So, Season 2, so if you have not heard our previous episode, we talked about the first 25 episodes of this series, which is Season 1. Season 2, we jump ahead 4 years in time, and we have a season that honestly feels almost less like a second season than just a straight-up sequel TV series, you know? Mm-hmm. But put together, I will say, Season 2 did not disappoint whatsoever. I have heard rumblings from people online who don't like Season 2 as much. That's dumb. Season 2 is great. And put together, I think Gundam 00 is one of the very best shows we've watched for this project. It is phenomenal. It is easily the best alternate universe Gundam, if you consider Turn A is like really in the Tomino-verse. And it's just one of the best ones. And I'll wait until seeing the movie for like my final determination. And obviously we will rank all of this in our second year anniversary show this summer. But good God, this show slaps very hard, Sean.
Yeah, no, I was very happy watching the second season again because, you know, I mean, at this point, Weekly Suit Gundam has been going on long enough that it's like the amount of time it's been since I originally watched these shows has like meaningfully increased, so that like in my memory some of it has gotten like foggier. And so there's a lot of stuff about season 2 I didn't quite remember, and especially because yes, there is, I think, like a certain opinion online, and I think it's not like a consensus. I think the opinion on season 2 is like somewhat divided, that there are people who really, really like it, and there's some people who don't like it as much. And so, yeah, I think some of that, like hearing that and like knowing that opinion was around, I couldn't tell like what was my feelings on season 2. Like I knew I really liked it, but I was like, is it as good? Is it worse than season 1? And rewatching it, I think I know why some people don't like season 2 as much, because it is very different in some ways. Like they've changed it, especially if you really like the first core of season 1, those first 12 to 13 episodes, which I still think is probably like the best concentration of 00. Like at this point, it's moved somewhat far away from that and turned into a relatively more traditional Gundam show. So I can kind of see where some people would be disappointed by that, and that it gets a little bit over the top in a way that I love, but it definitely is like, it feels less sort of grounded in like super serious hardcore, the way that first section of 00 like very much is this very grounded speculative fiction type story. But I think like when you look at the sweep of the show as a whole and see how that transition happens and where it's moving into more traditional Gundam structures, what it is saying about Gundam, and what it's saying about its like general themes by using those structures, I think is fascinating. And like overall, I think season 2 is just as good as season 1. I think there's some stuff, like particularly the second half of season 2, I think is like some of the best stuff in any Gundam show. And yes, I would agree that this is the best AU Gundam that we have watched. It might just be, I mean, we're getting pretty close to the end, and like I would probably say, you know, I'll have to rewatch Iron-Blooded Orphans, which would be its main competition. But my instinct is to say that this is the best AU Gundam that has been made so far.
it's so good, and it feels so fresh. Even when like season 2 does move into more traditional Gundam territory, the way it does it is still so in its own voice and like so in its own moment. Like we talked about a lot with season 1, this show is of the moment it is made. This is a Gundam that has updated its geopolitics to be about the 2000s. And if anything, I think season 2 goes harder on that than season 1 did. Like season 2 takes a lot of what is subtext with Saji and Luis and makes it the full central like front of mind text of season 2. And it is just so tied into its moment, and it's a moment that for you and I, Sean, I think is very formative because we grew up in the mid 2000s, and like it's a very meaningful show in that way too, where that level of engagement and that way it feels like Gundam has evolved from the Tomino World War II paradigm that it had been in for most of its life, and then really moving into something new, and also just the aesthetics of it. If anything, season 2 is even better animated than season 1. There are some episodes in here that I look at and I can't understand how they did it on a TV budget, like any TV budget or time. There's just ones that it's just it just looks like a movie or a really good OVA or something. It's wild. This and Turn A Gundam are easily the 2 best produced Gundam weekly TV series. It's a magnificent show, and it is a special show, and yeah, I am so excited to talk about season 2 because it's the same length as season 1, and it's got most of the same characters, and we talked about a lot of that already, and yet I feel like this conversation is going to be just as long, if not longer, because there's a lot that happens.
Yes. But this is like feels a little bit weird because this is the first episode in a very long time, Jonathan, where there's really no need for me to go into the history of the show, because the history of season 2 of Double O Gundam was they wanted to make a 50 episode show. They were smart and said, let's not do that all in one year. Let's split it the fuck up. And so that's what they did. And yeah, but otherwise it's the same people making it. Obviously, it's the same director, the same writers, all that is like the same crew. They just were much sort of more smart about how they structured the production of the show, so that they didn't murder every single person working on it to get it all out in 1 year.
So they didn't have to do a recap episode 2 episodes before the end?
Exactly, yes. It avoids the Seed Destiny problem of the Seed and Seed Destiny problem of the like slowly accelerating rate of recap episodes until you're like right at the end, and it's like, how do you even manage to fit a recap episode in here? That doesn't seem possible.
I mean, here's something that's amazing, Sean. Double O has no recap episodes whatsoever in season 2, and in season 1 it has one act of one episode does some recap stuff, and that's it. In these 50 episodes, like, and I think this is easily one of the best paced Gundam shows. Like, there is no wasted episode. There is no episode I point to in these 50 and go, that's the bad one, or that's the one where they're killing for time, or that one didn't quite work. Every one of them has a purpose. If anything, I think down the home stretch, I was like, this idea, like in this act of this episode, maybe could have been its own episode if they had 30 instead of 25. But like, that is so different from even Gundam shows we think are high tier wonderful, like Zeta and some of those like have their off episodes, or they're ones where like this is a little bit of a plot cul-de-sac. None of that. Gundam 00, like the season structure is such a massive breath of fresh air, and I assume that's true for the entire anime industry, but good God, it helps Gundam a lot, especially after seeing Seed and Seed Destiny both, I think, suffer from having to stick with that 50 episode thing.
Yeah, I think Seed and Seed Destiny are the 2 shows that struggle with that the most by far. But yeah, but even like otherwise like great shows like Zeta Gundam, Zeta still has its like weird Rosamia bottom shit, that arc at the end that gets cut out of the movie, right? That's like there entirely to keep Camille occupied while you do other stuff with other characters that like would not be necessary if you broke up the structure like this. And yeah, like really with Double O Gundam, I think you identified it, Jonathan, of that it really kind of feels like what they managed to do is kind of condense a Gundam and its own sequel into one show effectively by splitting into seasons. And so you get this really kind of focused version of those stories, because season 2 does like very kind of consciously model itself off of some stuff from like Zeta, where you have the A-Laws are clear like parallel to the Titans and stuff like that. That it is, and like, I mean, just the time jump in and of itself has like, it gives it a sequel feel, where all the characters are grown up and they're kind of dealing with the consequences of the first season. And so, yeah, so it's kind of managing to take, I think, some of the best parts of Gundams and their sequel shows from history and kind of putting it all together into one full story, making both sides of it tighter in the process.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So should we start by just talking about the time jump and the characters and the state of the world as we come into this?
Yeah, so it's set 4 years after season one, and it sort of expands on the thing you see at the very end of season one that we kind of hit on but didn't talk about in depth, which is at the end of season one you see the Earth Federation government become established, right? Which is like the very clear indication, if you are a Gundam fan, that okay, we are now moving into Gundam type territory, right? That this whole series is in many ways kind of like a prequel to Gundam in some ways, of not like in the like literal continuity, but in the sense of it is about what happens when mankind is beginning to take those first steps into space. Right, like colonies are being developed, space colonies are being developed, but none of them are really established yet. And you don't have this unified Earth government. And that's kind of one of the tricks of season one, is you kind of come to understand that, oh, the part of the point of season one is to establish a Gundam style status quo that then our main characters must deal with after the time jump. And so that after the time jump, you have the Earth Federation government, and then within the Earth Federation government, you have the A-Laws, which are your fascistic, autonomous peacekeeping force. That is basically your like super space cops that are able to go kind of act with impunity, and are, you know, they are kind of our main foes as this arm of the Earth Federation that truly has this, you know, that very fascist, we go where we want, we do what we want, we kill who we want in order to maintain control over the Earth sphere.
Yes. And I think that is a really compelling choice, because it allows this, you know, the season split and all that history you have with season one allows you to come into season two, and they've set up something that is much more self-consciously Gundam-esque, like Tomino Gundam setup. And yet, because you have all that history from season one and saw how it was all made, there's an added sort of richness to navigating that. And then it is all tweaked and reconfigured and rethought in a way that still fits this mid-2000s geopolitics, you know? And so, like, what the A-Laws are and what they're doing, it's obviously a reference to and, like, inspired by the Titans from Zeta Gundam, but it is also much more for a world where, like, the Iraq War has happened, you know? And the Middle East becomes a literal play field for weapons and competing geopowers. And yeah, that happened. This still happens. You know, and so all of that side of it is just so compelling. And then I think where you get to see all these characters have to, like, figure out how to fit within this structure. It is one of, I think, the most exciting uses of sort of the Gundam structure, because every AU Gundam, other than Mobile Fighter G Gundam, which is proudly its own original thing, and I love it so much, but all of the other ones really are trying to, like, do something with, like, what, like, Tomino left in all of his Gundam stuff, and, like, see how we can reconfigure and play with it. And, like, the most explicit of those is After War Gundam X. You know, Seed is it goes in quite a few different directions with it, from being kind of like almost a straight remake and then going in a different direction, and then Seed Destiny doesn't know what the fuck it's doing. But like, this show has such a, like, creative use of that, where it is, because we don't come into that structure until halfway through, it is such a thoughtful and engaged critical, like, lens on this world and these tropes and what it does with all of those by the end. And, like, you know, just, I mean, all on its own, you can just look at, again, Saji and Luis as kind of like our center point of this entire series, and that Luis becomes basically the for Murasame or something like that of this series, the, like, tortured, you know, super soldier girl. And but in this case, it's not someone we've never seen before who's mysterious. It's this girl whose history we know very intimately, and that makes it even more painful. And there's just, season two is full of turns like that are so interesting to me.
Yeah, and I think part of what it is with season two, and again, I think this is something that turns some people off from the season, but I think it's like a very needed and necessary evolution is that it takes like the elements from the original show and makes them more exaggerated, and that's kind of what the Earth Federation government feels like. Is it's this exaggerated version of what geopolitics is, where it is like the super UN or super NATO, right? I mean, like literally within the show, like the kernel of what the Earth Federation is comes from the United Nations, right? That's part of what Alejandro Cross, the guy who's like Ribbons' Patsy, who dies at the end of season 1, he was like a major representative of the UN. And so its vision of kind of how this comes about is born through currently existing like international treaties and organizations that then come together and evolve into this kind of world power. But not everybody's included in what counts as the world power. But again, that's like an exaggerated version of what already happens in modern geopolitics, right? We already have our alliances. We already have like Japan, which is not like particularly involved directly in wars in the Middle East, not particularly, but is through its alliance with NATO and with the United States is involved and is complicit, right? You are in the same way that Saji is, right? That your hands are not like clean because you are part of a large international organization that is creating this political instability in different countries in the world for your own benefit, and you see benefit through the treaty. And so that's kind of what it does, I think, in most spaces in season 2, is it looks for those elements and kind of exaggerates them and makes them more monstrous, right? It takes like drone strikes and turns them into these autonomous killing machines and space lasers and just like blows the proportions out more. And I think it's a very satisfying direction to take the show, is to start with what is, still sci-fi, it's still mechs and stuff, but as we talked about with season 1, it feels very grounded. Even within Gundam, that is for mecha relatively a grounded series, it is like very familiar what it's dealing with. And here, as it pushes more into that exaggerated space that you expect with Gundam, it is recontextualized with all that knowledge from that grounding to like really kind of more richly color or tint how you're understanding what the Earth Federation is, what like their actions represent, and what the characters are dealing with.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, we also, and it makes the opening act of this season is like just hits the ground running. There's no like slowdown anywhere in these 25 episodes, because you have to start by like creating a new status quo, and like getting the band back together, basically, is the opening act of this season. And then there's big stuff that happens in this season that would otherwise be the climax of a series, like the first assault on the Memento Mori is the halfway point of this season, and a big fight with a space laser. That's like how most Gundam shows end, and so that's our halfway point. And then we basically do the equivalent of a colony drop, and then we have the big battle at the end. There's so many events, but I really do like I remember just sitting down to watch. Let's talk about the premiere of this season, The Angel's Second Advent, which is the episode title in the history of Gundam that sounds the most like an episode of Neon Genesis Evangelion. And you start with just seeing some of like the recapitulated status quo, but mostly everything is kind of blown up from where we were last season. And then Setsuna comes in to save the day at this one colony and rescue Saji specifically, in the most badass mobile suit of all time, ?
Yes, so yeah, the reveal that Setsuna has been fighting alone, right, since the end of the first season, where the Exia is like partially destroyed and he is sort of just like catapulted out into space. He has been fighting, and he has these very like rough guerrilla repairs to this super fucked up Exia that has like a big like cloth cape on it that's covering up one of its really fucked up arms. Part of its face is destroyed, and it's got this whole like, what if somehow like a Gundam could also be a Terminator look with like the red eye. Yes. It is a very, very awesome looking fucking Gundam.
That whole premiere is fantastic, and it introduces the A-Laws and the little drones that shoot people up, and it's very violent, and it is a very disturbing episode at places. But the Setsuna coming in with that mobile suit, and it's that thing is on screen for maybe 5 minutes, and it is one of my favorite mobile suits of all time. Just the fucked up Exia is one of the coolest things. And that feeling of like, because I had a little bit of that trepidation you described, Sean, of like, I hadn't seen season 2, but I had heard some of the mixed reactions. So I'm like, I loved season 1 so much. I just hope this is good. And then I see that premiere and I'm like, yeah, we're in good hands. Because the rest of this could be shit and I still might like season 2 just for that episode and just for the fucked up Exia is maybe enough for me. And that's just, the tip of the iceberg. But it's a great start. And I think also as like a statement of intent and like the confidence, and this is something that is there for me with Gundam 00 that maybe elevates it from a lot of other, not just Gundam, but just TV storytelling in general, is just the sheer confidence it has at every inch of its being, of like, it knows where it's going and it's never meandering or feeling like it is trying to suss out a direction. And I think that's there in season 1 very much too. But season 2 opening with introducing the A-Laws, very violent confrontation at this colony. Saji is there. Saji almost gets killed. He meets with Setsuna. He has this confrontation of learning Setsuna is a celestial being. And then they go off and are like rescued by the remnants of the Ptolemaeus. All in that one episode is like, okay, they know what they are fucking doing. And this is a statement of intent. And I loved that. And just getting Saji like in the crew right away and that kind of thing is just the kind of stuff where it's like they're not dicking around here. They know what they're doing.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that, because I couldn't remember at what point Saji joins with the Ptolemaeus and Celestial Being, because I remember this like that's a part of what season 2 is, but I had a hard time remembering when it happens, because you figure it's going to happen deeper into the season than the first episode, but I think it's so smart for them to, most of episode 1 is framed from Saji's perspective, so you're really kind of with him, and kind of reasserting part of the dynamic of the show, which is that Saji is your grounded, relatable audience insert type character. He is your like teenage Japanese boy, right, who is like witnessing these events that in any other Gundam show he would be your Amuro or your Camille or whoever who ends up in the Gundam. But here he's a passive observer who is just getting fucked around by the A-Laws because he happens to be working with another person. It is one thing that was weird is, I don't know if you remember the beginning of Jedi Fallen Order, Jonathan, but it is the exact same thing. Like, it is the exact same opening. It's you are working with this other dude, and it turns out that the other dude is like part of like this faction, rebel faction or whatever, and then the fascists show up and kill him, and you get thrown into the conflict. Is the same fucking opening and is fucking weird. But it was like, I just did not remember that when I played that game. I have no idea if that was conscious or not, but it's weirdly similar. But then he gets thrown into this work camp, reunites with Setsuna, realizes that Setsuna is part of Celestial Being, and then like just to survive ends up coming back with Setsuna to the Ptolemaeus. That all happens in the first episode, and so within the first episode they take your audience insert character who had like limited contact with our actual Gundam boy Setsuna, and now they've put them back together in the ship over the course of the premiere. And that to me is like a real statement of intent of what they're trying to do with particularly like the Setsuna side of the show by reuniting these two kind of what feels like you come to realize over the course of the season are two fractured halves of one whole Gundam protagonist, right? You have the traumatized child soldier in Setsuna, and you have the audience insert like everyman character in Saji, and they were separated for most of season 1, and you're kind of seeing them deal with these different parts of their lives, and then now in season 2 they come together, and that frames so much of both sides of that story of what Saji's journey is and kind of having to become more like Setsuna, and Setsuna's journey and having to become more like Saji in the way that he has to become more of like a whole person and less of a weapon.
And I said earlier that season 2 takes the subtext that was there with Saji and Luis and makes it text, and it's very literal. It's like Saji is plucked out of the subtext, out of like this corner of the show, and put in the Gundam, and put in the Ptolemaeus, and now he's there, and now that is text. Like, because season 2 is really about that question of, and I think the central theme of season 2 is, what do you fight for? Like, what is your awareness of the world, and with that awareness, what choices do you make? And it is most literalized through Saji, because he is someone who comes to understand his own privilege from where he was, and that he lived a life where the fighting was separate from him, and that now that it is immediate to him, and there are several points where they make it, I mean, it's immediate the whole time, but they make it, really visceral, like when all of the Cateron soldiers die because he was an idiot. he has to confront the idea that it's immediate to me now, and it never wasn't. It always was there, and I was ignorant to it. And now that my eyes are open, and there's a great moment. It's like the exact halfway point of the season where he almost flies away with the Exia's, not the Exia, the double O riser.
Yeah.
And it would have been a very traditional Gundam Boy moment, right? Every Gundam Boy takes the thing and flies away. And he realizes, this is the old me. This is the me who thought, I am not part of this. I can't be part of this. This is other people's fight. Fuck this. I'm leaving. And he says, no, I'm here. Like, I don't know what to do with this quite yet, but I know I can't just leave. And everybody is dealing with that in this season of Gundam 00. And it is something that everybody on Earth, should be thinking about if you live in, a, first world society with privilege is, what are you... With the awareness you have, one, are you going to become aware of the world around you? And that is the process of season 1, is becoming aware. And then if you are aware, what do you do with it? And it's not just that this show is engaged and it's in the politics of the day. I think this show is pretty subtly subtweeting other Gundam shows, like Gundam Wing and Seed and Seed Destiny to a certain degree, of the plot mechanic of the person who just chooses to be totally on the sidelines, and violence is wrong 100% of the time, and fighting is wrong, and all this stuff. No, actually, there is a lot, there's a lot of gray area here. There's a lot of nuance, but it is important to pick a side and fight for that. It is really fucking important, and that is what this season is about. And it does that really beautifully through the entire tapestry of characters. Because we could go through, I feel like, every level of this, and that choice is put to everybody this season. And it's where they live or die. It's where they rise to or fall, is on that choice.
Yeah, absolutely. It is about, what do you fight for? And then it's also about, how do you create something new, right? How do you move, which is a very Gundam theme, right? It's very new type-ish, and this is where you get, I think it's by far Double O Gundam has the most successful new type stuff, maybe since the original Mobile Suit Gundam. I've always been kind of back and forth on how much I like the way that post Mobile Suit Gundam deals with new type stuff, and we've talked about this on this podcast when we've done those episodes, that sometimes I like it, sometimes I think it's a little bit too magic. And here, they kind of go back a little bit to, I think, some of the sensibility the original Mobile Suit Gundam had in the ability for Setsuna to connect people together and, what the consequences of that are in trying to build something new. But one thing I like about that is that the show, like you're saying, in terms of subtweeting other Gundam shows, the show feels like it is, very consciously trying to make this statement of we need to change, in the sense of Gundam needs to change. That Gundam needs to move beyond the things that it has been stuck in forever because the world has changed. And I think that's you get a lot of that very literally in the show, symbolically represented in Ribbons, who plays Ribbons, the mobile suit that Ribbons is in at the end, which resembles directly the original Mobile Suit Gundam, right? But it is this urging of saying we need to move past what that understanding of war was, that was so informed by World War II, where Japan was directly involved, and the people who made it were either lived during or grew up immediately after Japan's involvement in World War II and what happened to their country. But now it's that's not what the Japanese position in the world is anymore. The Japanese position is Saji's, right? And I think it's so powerful having that assertion of saying we can't have Japanese Gundam boys because Japanese people are not the people who are suffering from war anymore. It is someone like Setsuna living in the Middle East, and so much of Saji's journey over the course of this season in particular is having his face fucking shoved into the dirt to say look, this is what is happening, this is what has always been happening, and you have been conveniently ignorant of it. And I think that really harsh push to say we can't have that perspective anymore. We can't have the Gundam boy be Japanese anymore, or vaguely Japanese, because it's not representative of what war is in the 21st century. And I think that that's you have to have that understanding in order to build that something new. You have to realize that it's not our place, it's Setsuna's place, and the other characters to have that conversation and to push that forward.
Yeah, and 13 years on, which is how long it's been since this season aired, it's as relevant as ever. It's wholly prescient to like the world as it has continued to be. It really feels like a Gundam for the moment, in a way that is beautiful. And I agree with a lot of what you were saying about the innovator stuff, and I also, there's a conversation to be had that we'll get to when we get to like the end of the show, that it does the new type stuff, I think, I agree, like on par or better than a lot of like post original Gundam. But it also does that by just going back to a lot of those ideas that, especially like, I will make the argument, this is another Gundam that is heavily influenced by Tomino's novelization of the original Gundam. It is like heavily influenced by, and I will talk about that later. But yeah, it's a hell of a thing. So should we do kind of what we did last time and break down some characters and catch up on where they are?
Yeah, sure. So where do you want to start?
Well, let's start with Setsuna, because that's where we started last time, and we had him here. And I really liked Setsuna in Season 1. I love Miyano's performance. I love the character design. I love the idea of the character. I love the move to make him someone from the Middle East, an Arabic character who has like ethnicity in his body. It is not like a subtle thing. That is part of who he is. And I love him as a pilot, all of that. And I was still surprised at how much I came to love him more in Season 2. He has one of just the like clearest arcs and journeys of any Gundam protagonist. And going from the beginning of Season 1, where he is, I guess timid is the wrong word, but he is very quiet. He follows his orders. He does his thing. He views himself as a human weapon, and that's it. To being a really dynamic individual who is not just that, but is a born leader. And by the end of this season, he is the leader of celestial being. Like Sumeragi is the captain of the ship, the Ptolemaeos. But like the final minutes of the show make it abundantly clear, if it wasn't already, like he's the guy standing on the bridge giving the orders. He is the leader of celestial being, and he is that because everyone else looks to him as their North Star. And you see that progression every step of the way. And I mean, man, getting an actor like Mamoru Miyano is like a godsend for that, because he is so good at tracing those minute little changes in a character. I also just love the redesign that they've given him, the way he visually grows up. They do this with several characters, but like the other day I was going back to some Season 1 episodes to get some screenshots for something, and I saw like what I now think of as little Setsuna from Season 1, and it's like, oh my god, he grew up. He was a little boy in this. He's a man in Season 2, and he grows up. And then, of course, he is in just a ludicrously cool Gundam for this show and becomes a ludicrously good pilot. He's just all around one of the best Gundam boys. Setsuna F Seiei for the fucking win. That's what the F stands for.
Yeah, Setsuna fucking Seiei. It's like that should have been what, like in the epilogue like sequence where Daybreak's Bell is playing at the end of Season 2. That's what someone should have turned, like Lasse should have turned and says, anyways, Setsuna, what does the F stand for? He just looks him in the eyes and says, Setsuna fucking Seiei. And then they fly off into space. What
I thought you were going to say is he does that. So Lasse turns and says, "What? We never learned. What's the F stand for?" And then what I imagine is Setsuna puts on like some fucking like Quattro Bagina style sunglasses. Says Setsuna fucking say, and then rips them off and throws them. And the theme from like CSI Miami starts.
Yes, absolutely. That is an even better version of that dumb joke. But yeah, no, Setsuna F Seiei, he has always been one of my favorite Gundam boys, and yeah, like when we talked about him in Season 1, like I was trying to kind of set us up for this conversation in Season 2, because this is like, because Setsuna is like the thing that to me, like, in my memory stands out the most about Double O Gundam is how elegantly crafted the character is. And if there is anything that is like a condemnation of a previous Gundam series, it is the whole existence of Setsuna F Seiei as a condemnation of what happened with Hiro Yui in Gundam Wing.
Yes.
Yeah, because it's a character archetype that's very common in anime, but is not actually that common in Gundam, which is like the cool protagonist, by which I mean like he is like both like cool in the way we use that word casually, and then also cold, right? Like it's a very stoic kind of character that it feels like in some ways kind of unreachable, a little bit standoffish, but also just like says and does really cool shit all the time. And that's very much what Hiro Yui is, and Hiro Yui is just a very straight-faced version of that character archetype, which ends up being very boring. because they too much believe that he is cool, and he's just cool for the whole show. Everyone thinks that he's cool, even when for the plot to happen he has to do shit that's very dumb. The show never seems to realize that what he did was dumb. Whereas with Setsuna, it's on the outside, he's like exactly like Hiro Yui, right? He says the same kind of shit. He's got the same kind of tone of voice and the way he carries himself, that he's very stoic. He doesn't say a lot. The things he says oftentimes like feels very cool, and he talks about how he is a Gundam and all this shit. And he feels cool. But in season 1, he's such a fragile person, right? Like, he is someone whose entire life is motivated by this intense trauma he has from his childhood of being effectively brainwashed and killing his own parents. And so on the outside, he projects this emotional coolness, which is what I think he wants people to see him as. But on the inside, he's just a complete fucking mess, and he has no idea what he's doing. Right? He's just ripped apart inside, trying to understand who he is, what his place in the world is. Is there a god? What are the Gundams? Like, what should he be fighting for? Is he a weapon? Is he not a weapon? Is he trying to get revenge for his parents or not? Because getting revenge for his parents means killing himself. Like, all that kind of stuff. Like, he's just so broken up. And you start with season 2 seeing him already having matured a lot as like an extension of what you see from like the ending of season 1, where you see him kind of building that like really kind of human center back up in this like more solid foundation. And when he comes back, his redesign, he is one of the coolest looking Gundam protagonists, I think. Because that kind of culture shock of what he looks like kind of hit me when I watched season 1, where in my memory, it's season 2 Setsuna, and going back and being like, oh my god, he's this scrawny little 14-year-old kid. Like, he looks so young in season 1, but especially in contrast to his much more, I think, kind of iconic design in season 2, where he seems so like actually put together, like actually mature, has that like foundation. And then over the course of season 2, you see him building that up, right? Which is him becoming the innovator, right? Him becoming the person who breaks new ground to sort of try to motivate that change and understanding the people around him. And you have that big moment near the mid of the season, I think is when it happens, where he has that vision of Lock-on Stratus, and like he has that vision of him killing his parents and him trying to stop his parents' death, and he can't. And then actual like Lock-on Stratus, Neil Delandy, shows up with the eye patch and everything, and says, the only way you can change the past is by how you use it to understand your present, but the things that happened in the past can never change, but you can change. You have to change, Setsuna. I couldn't do it, so you have to. And that becomes Setsuna's catchphrase for like the second half of the season. He moves on from his whole catchphrase being either I am Gundam or there is no God, which is the two things he says all the time in season 1. And in season 2, it's about no, like things have to change and I have to become that change. And that's what really like motivates his character to become this very wholly put together, solid human being that feels like it's like what Toru Furuya says about Amuro in that TV segment I did subtitles for, where he's talking about Char's counterattack Amuro, of like adult Amuro has that quality of he's put his life together, he's figured shit out, like he has this solid foundation where it feels like he knows who he is and what he needs to try to do. And it's such a huge amount of growth from this fragile, broken up little kid in season 1 to this fully confident adult by the end of season 2. It's just one of the most elegantly constructed character arcs, because the whole time on the outside he seems fairly similar. He says similar kinds of things. He's got his cool tone of voice. So it's like the changes are so subtle, but they're so effective in building out that character.
Yes, I agree with all of that. And I think it's, worth thinking about the innovator / new type shit here, because what makes him so unique from every other Gundam boy who deals with new type stuff is that he's actively inviting it. He is saying, I want to become this. Bring it fucking on, right? Like, he is pushing it forward. Whereas for most other Gundam characters that deal with new type stuff, it's either they're resisting it or it's kind of passive. Like, it's something that happens in the back of their mind without them, like, knowing or trying. Like, Amuro, it's not that Amuro is reluctant and doesn't want it to happen, but it's not something that is like front of mind. There's something going on in me, and I need to push it and pull it out of myself. That is not his vision. The closest this is to is like, I think Unicorn Gundam does a little bit of this with its main character and some of that, and Unicorn is like my other favorite presentation of new type stuff outside of the original Gundam, so I think there's some similarity here, and Unicorn was made after 00, so some of that makes sense. But like, yeah, that is part of what makes it so dynamic when you have this character who's just like, vision of how he's going to approach all the crazy power shit that we get is just very fundamentally different. And again, just you cannot praise the voice actor Miyano enough for all of that, because as you say, it's these minute little changes he has to trace, and that is what he is so uniquely good at doing as a voice actor. And I praised him for that in the context of Death Note last time, and I think that's still very true. You hear him do that with Light Yagami, and he's extraordinarily good at it, and he pulls off the same kind of trick here with Setsuna, maybe with an even greater degree of difficulty, because there's no equivalent to Death Note where like he gets to just go fucking crazy. He doesn't get that. Setsuna doesn't go crazy. Setsuna cries a little bit, but he doesn't go crazy. And so you have to do it all within a certain range, and it is a tremendous vocal performance. He won the Voice Actor of the Year award at the second annual Seiyu Awards for this, and what a richly deserved award for that actor.
Yeah, because it is just like, it's one of those where the performance is just like flabbergasting to me, because it's the kind of thing where it's like, I just can't even imagine how you do it. I can't imagine how you stay within the vocal range that Setsuna FSA is for like 95% of the show and still be able to portray those character differences so well. It's just so, what he's asked to do is so subtle, and yeah, it is incredibly impressive. And it ends up with Setsuna. Like, Setsuna has, since I've seen Double Gundam, been absolutely one of my favorite Gundam boys. It has been fun to re-experience that and like remind myself why I liked this character so much on watching it the first time, because I think it is his character arc is so satisfying to experience. It's one of the most satisfying since Amuro's original, right? Like, you get, I think, a very similar feeling that you got from the end of Mobile Suit Gundam when you see Amuro just like trashing enemy mobile suits without even having to think about it, and how much he's grown. Yes. It's the same thing with Setsuna, of how much it's like, it's not about the 00 Gundam, right? Because the innovators have fucking Veda, and they've got Trans Am, and then fucking Ribbons has his twin drive system. Like, they have all the shit that Setsuna has, and they still can't touch him because he has grown as a person to that extent. And that it's one of my favorite things to see in a Gundam show is how well that character's arc is dramatized through the action, and they're like represented as their ability as a pilot.
Absolutely. It's I think the one where it's really literalized for me is his big duel with Mr. Bushido, Graham Aker. And that, you know, like, part of me in my mind wanted the full episode-long epic duel that goes on for 20 minutes and is just the most amazing thing ever. And instead, it is mostly contained to the post-credits scene of one episode, 21, and then the pre-credits scene of episode 22, and it is very fast. And it is a phenomenal mobile suit fight, but it is very in line with Amuro versus Char at the end of Gundam, or more accurately even, I think, in Char's counterattack, of just like, Amuro's like, get the fuck out of my way, I have to go stop the big asteroid. Fuck you, Char. And that's what it is. And it's because and that's where you see that growth. And also contrasted with the other character, in this case, Mr. Bushido, which we'll talk about. So good. So good. Yeah. So should we talk about the other members of Celestial Being?
Yeah, let's, because, you know, I mentioned Lock-on Stratos and that vision before, and so now it's time. This is one I was, like, very excited to get to, because this is a thing that is fun to watch season 1, knowing they do this thing that seems it should be fucking impossible. Like, it is such a bad idea, and they pull it off so well, of, let's take, like, what is designed to be the, like, audience favorite character, Lock-on Stratos, Neil DeLandy, who is the de facto leader of, like, the Gundam Meisters in season 1, who dies tragically at the end of season 1. It's like, let's take that audience favorite character who is so fucking cool, and now let's take his, like, younger twin brother, and Lyle DeLandy, who is set up. He is set up in season 1. You'll blink and you miss it, but there's like 2 or 3 brief moments where you get like an indication of him being there. and bring him in and have him take over Neil's place as Lyle DeLandley, the new Lock-On Stratos, played by the same actor, Shinichiro Miki, and have him just full on be a Gundam Meister, and he's a Gundam Meister the whole show. It's not like and he's a clone that turns into a villain or something. It's nothing like that. It's just like straight up, that's just what it is. It's the twin brother, looks the same voice actor, and you just put him in to it's a different Gundam technically, but it's a similar type of Gundam, and you just roll with it. And that feels like something that should just alienate your audience immediately, that like you would never expect your audience to be able to accept a new identical version of that character to overtake the role of the original that everyone loves so much. But it is like one of the best parts of season 2. It is a fucking magic trick that like, is down to the like incredible performance by Shinichiro Miki and being able to find the distinction between those two characters within a very similar vocal range, and then also the writing being able to create a very different type of character and character arc for Lyle compared to his older brother.
It's so good. It is so astonishingly good because it is on paper the worst idea. And like, it's a punchline. Like, there's a famous example of this. The John Woo movie, A Better Tomorrow, which is like one of the most famous Hong Kong action movies. It's like the start of like what we now think of as like the Hong Kong sort of crime, soap opera, heroic bloodshed movie. And it's where Andy Lau and Chow Yun-fat got their start. And Chow Yun-fat in that movie in particular, playing the character Mark, became like the style icon for men in all of Asia for like 10 years. Because he's got the sunglasses and the leather jacket and all this. He's so cool. But Chow Yun-fat, his character dies at the end of the first movie because they weren't thinking about sequels and all that stuff. And it's a Hong Kong movie. The cool character has to get 100 bullets in him at the end, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But then, okay, this movie is one of the biggest hits in the country's history. Now let's do A Better Tomorrow 2. Well, we're not going to do this without Chow Yun-fat. So what happens is Andy Lau goes to Singapore and finds that Mark had an identical twin brother. And by the end of the movie, he's in the same getup with the sunglasses and everything, and they just replace Mark. That's what I was sort of thinking they were going to be doing here with Lyle. And it's not. And I think it's because the writing makes a really concerted effort to distinguish Lyle. Like, one, he is just, at the beginning, he is not only not the leader of this team, he's not really part of it. He doesn't know these people. He doesn't particularly care about these people. He's a Cateron agent. He does not really have loyalties to Celestial Being. And that alone makes him such a fascinating difference. And then seeing someone having to consciously, like, he's not a bad sniper, but he has to learn to do the Lock-On Stratos stuff. And in doing that, he kind of realizes that he did care about his brother, who at the beginning he doesn't seem that broken up about. And he does start to care about this legacy. And then slowly he does start to care about these other Gundam Meisters. And he is part of the team by the end. And he gets the most badass moments of those last 2 episodes. Because holy shit, he gets some badass moments. And yet by the end, even though he has fully become Lock-On Stratos, he is still very clearly not that Lock-On Stratos. Even though in the end credits, they literally didn't even have to change the credits. It's just the same actor with the same name. Yeah. Like, that's probably the main reason they did it. They didn't have to rewrite the fucking credits. And they pull it off. It is stupid how well it works.
Yeah, and it is that thing where it's very satisfying, his character arc in season 2 of going from someone who is effectively like the newbie in the group, which just like, there's like just very satisfying dramatic irony to it, right? Of having a character who is the leader, who was the most effective. This is the dude who has like probably the mic drop moment of season 1 when he first shoots from the Earth into space.
Yes.
Like with one of the coolest things any Gundam character's ever done. And the character who's so cool, he ends season 1 with an eye patch because that's how fucking cool he is. And so taking that really cool, mature leader character and then having someone who seems in most ways to be identical, but then having them be the rookie, there's just like a powerful irony to that I think works for the early episodes really well. But then also having him be someone who doesn't actually like specifically believe in Celestial Being at the beginning of the season, and then at the end, he is one of the 2 Gundam Meisters left, right? Because Alelia seems to be on Earth, and he is with Mary and like doing his own shit. Tieria has become one with Veda and has ascended back into heaven as an angel. Which is, we'll talk about like the religious imagery that is very heavy with all the innovator stuff here. But then it's Setsuna who's leading them, and Lock-On Stratos who's still with them in that last shot at the end with all the crew of the Ptolemaeus. And yeah, that arc of having him be like effectively a non-believer in celestial beings, someone using them for his own ends to support the rebel faction that he's actually a part of, and then ending with being one of the two remaining Gundam-meisters that is sticking with celestial beings' mission after the end of the show.
It's great. It's so good. And let's talk. Can we just talk about his big moments at the end of the season, because it ties in some other characters. Like, so he is the one who gets to kill Ali Al-Sachez. And on one hand, I'm not 100% sure how I feel about this, so I'm curious to get your thoughts. That, like, I'm not 100% sure how I feel about how Ali Al-Sachez is, like, used this season, and that he doesn't, like, Setsuna never gets a final I didn't need Setsuna to be the one to kill him, but I just felt like there was maybe a lack of closure there, but also maybe that's intentional because Setsuna has moved on from that. Who knows? But they do give it to Lyle, and Lyle, the animation, the timing, the direction on drop the gun, Ali Al-Sachez being an evil fuck goes, haha, I win, goes to fire, and Lyle just flips in space, grabs the gun, and shoots him straight between the eyes. That is some Clint Eastwood-ass shit, and I love it.
Yeah, no, it's great. Yeah, like, I like the way that Setsuna just completely moves on from Ali Al-Sachez. It's just like he's dealing with bigger shit. Like, I think there's something satisfying about... because I think it's that encounter he has with Ali where he gets shot with the bullet that has the like red gene particles on it or whatever, that like he's dealing with through that like middle section of the show. That's like what motivates his vision he has of Lock on Stratos, that gives him the desire to like become change. I feel like that's kind of the moment where it's like Ali Al-Sachez is whatever, right? Like I feel like that's when Setsuna kind of puts that behind him and moves on. And I think it does give Lyle the completion of his arc of like re-embracing his family and the things that he lost in his brother, and then like and his family from the original terrorist bombing that Ali was a part of. And yes, it does lead to, I think, just one of the best, because also the fight between them is when they're in their mobile suits is also one of the fucking best, where they're just completely fucking each other up. This is also where Lock on Stratos in season 2 gets one of the best Gundams, also the Gundam Kerdem, where it has one of my favorite things, which are the shield bits, which I think are so fucking cool.
They're so cool.
What a great evolution of the like bit or funnel concept to make them like these big thick plates of metal that are both you can use to like ram into things and damage them that way, and then also to block shots. And he has just some of like the best action sequences, or contributes to some of the best action sequences by using the shield bits. That I just think it's one of the coolest parts of the Gundam shit in this show, because, you know, the season 1 had some great mobile suit fights. I think season 2 has just like among the best mobile suit fights pretty consistently in the whole series, or in like the whole franchise.
Yes. Well, because it also has some of the best mobile suits in the franchise. Like, that is one of the biggest breaths of fresh air, is just like, oh god, the mobile suits. Like, most AU Gundam shows, other than, again, Turn A is its own thing, don't have great mobile suits. Like, Gundam Wing does, and credit to Gundam Wing, but After War Gundam X is mostly recycled. G Gundam, they're mostly kind of jokes, but they're funny. Gundam Seed Destiny are mostly recycled again, and then this feels like new Gundam mobile suits, and and just all the way throughout, they're just all so good.
Yes.
And so then you get great battles out of them, too. Yeah, and then Lock-On also has the moment where he kills Revival in the finale, and just like the move he does in the mobile suit and the animation and all of that, and there's so much good stuff. Lock-On Stratos, a badass, whether it is Neil or Lyle, and I do love that one of the main characters of a season 2 in which we have characters named Ribbons and Revive and Mr. Bushido, one of the main characters is just named Lyle. That is a good choice.
Yes, it is. You have consistently ridiculous. I feel the same thing about Billy Katagiri. It's like you have all these really ridiculous characters, and over here's Lyle, and over there is Billy.
It's so good. Oh man, you can pretty much trace the quality of a Gundam show by the quality of the silly names, and that's why Gundam 00 is one of the best.
Yes.
It's got really good silly names, including Alleluia Haptism in this one.
Very good segue, Jonathan.
Yes, who I do think is the Gundam Meister of the 4 who maybe gets left behind the most this season in terms of like how interesting I find him. not that I cease finding him interesting. He's a great character, but like I feel like the meat of his stuff is more in season 1, and here it's mostly the stuff with Marie, which is very good, but it is roughly resolved by the halfway point of this season, and then the last stretch is more about the other Gundam Meisters.
Yeah, I think basically what they do is they make season 1, particularly Alelia, heavy, and then go very light on Tierra, and then they flip that in season 2 and make Alelia's role is fairly light in season 2. Like you said, it resolves more or less at that midpoint with Marie, and him like getting that back. But then they spend that time that they would have spent on Alelia on Tierra instead.
Yes. And we'll talk about Tierra in a second, but yeah, I mean, I still like Alleluia. His all the new mobile suits are good. His is good. It transforms. It's cool. It's sweet. And the stuff with Hallelujah, I do kind of like that it's like they don't bring it up again. Like there is the moment where Hallelujah like revives in his mind, but is like basically a benign element within him that has been like synthesized, and so it feels like all that stuff that happened in season 1 with that is rewarded and not reversed, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah, and one thing I do like that they do with his arc is in that second half, it's again, it's not sort of focused on very heavily, but I do like the arc he has of like, he has this very kind of paternalistic attitude towards Marie that like, I think, at least for me, rubs me the wrong way for that middle part. Yeah. But like the show incorporates that, right? That then I think it's Lock-On tells him, it's like, dude, she's her own person. Like you, like, I get it. I get like your whole thing, but you need to let go and like let her / Soma like make their own choices and live their own life. If she wants to fight, she has much a reason to fight as anybody else. And Alleluia having to like let go of that very kind of, you know, masculine paternalistic attitude he has towards her, to like this need to protect her and instead look at her as more of an equal. Like I like that part quite a bit.
And you said earlier that Gundam 00 has some subtext of just like asking Gundam to move on from things. That's how that feels to me too, because Marie very much feels like the character type who would fight for a while and then be like protected. I mean, see, Destiny just did it with a princess lady. I've already forgotten their names, but you know who I'm talking about.
Oh, fuck, because I was about to say Locus, and now I can't move on from Locus in my head.
It's not Locus, it's the other one.
Yes, I know.
But you know what I mean. They do the exact same thing, where she just never gets in a mobile suit in Season 2 and is, forgotten about because they need to protect her, quote-unquote. And in this, it is Alleluia.
Cogly, that's her name.
Yes,
there we go. Yes, I knew it would come to me eventually.
Sorry. But anyway, like, here, Alleluia gets called on it. And they play it straight for a little bit, and then they stop playing it straight, and he has to accept that, and then she's a big part of the finale and everything, too. So, great stuff there. And then, maybe this, like, stealth MVP in all of this is Tierra motherfucking Erde, who definitely made the least impression in Season 1. Not that I didn't like him. Cool character. Holy crap, I love this guy. And his just general, like, movement from computer boy who trusts completely in Veda to extremely human person who trusts completely in his friends, and trusts in them so much that he is willing to give up his human body for that humanity, is low-key one of the best arcs in all of Gundam. Tierra rocks.
Yes, it was that thing where it's like, I found it so hard to try to talk about that character last episode, because I'm like they don't even, they very heavily hint that he is some sort of like artificial human connected to Veda, but they never directly state it in Season 1. So I was like, we just have to, let's just like rain check this character so we can actually talk about him. Because yes, his arc is so satisfying of, I guess this is where we have to address the like Christian mythology stuff that they put in that is in the background in Season 1, but it's like much stronger in Season 2, of where you have these innovators, or as you come to understand, they're actually innovades. They are supposed to induce, they're catalysts, right? They're supposed to induce the change in actual humans, not be the change themselves. And they are angels, right, in a Christian sense. So Ribbons and all of his people, like Ribbons is Lucifer, and we'll talk about him in a little bit. And Tyria is an angel, or maybe he's kind of also Jesus at the end, which is sort of where they go with his character of him sacrificing his mortal body and dying for everyone's sins so you can become one with the Holy Ghost and protect everybody again, that kind of shit. Right? But that's like what they're playing with, is this idea of Tyria at the beginning is this arrogant figure who believes himself to be all-knowing, or like if he himself is not all-knowing, he's got like a direct line to the big guy, right? He is the one who's literally connected to Veda, who is the thing that is constructing the master plan that he's following, and he's like, I'm the one who interprets Veda. I am above you humans. And he's the one he goes around judging people for most of season 1, whether or not he, in his vision, are worthy to be Gundam Meisters or not. And then his relationship with Lock-On over the course of season 1 plants that seed of humanity in him. And that's one of, like, I think the starkest things you see in the time jump is you come back with Tieria, and he is the one Gundam Meister who's still with Ptolemaeus and the rest of the Celestial Being that is like goes and picks up Setsuna. And one of his first lines in season 2 is him like expressing his faith that like if we go there, Setsuna will be there. Not because he's connected to Veda and Veda's predicted it or whatever, but he just has this faith in the people he fought alongside in season 1. And so having him be very humanistic for most of season 2. And I love that his arc then is to take that journey of having fallen to Earth, become like a human, learned what it is to be human and like the value there, and then to, again, it's very Jesus, to reascend back into quote-unquote heaven with Veda, and him totally sacrificing his mortal body in that existence to become something to kind of oversee everything again with this newfound wisdom. I find it like to be a very, very powerful arc that is a really effective use of, I think, what are the more compelling aspects of Christian mythology to me.
Oh yeah, it's I like this a lot better than like the stuff in Eva, or that's just like using it for the imagery. Because if it's a Jesus allegory, which it obviously is, it's a really interesting one because most Jesus allegories do not play with the idea of Jesus being humbled, and that's what they're doing here. And like obviously that's not like a scriptural thing, but it is the idea of like, well, what if you had a son of God who knew he was a son of God, and instead of going with that purpose of I am going to like help humans, I think I'm better than them. And then over time, I stop thinking that, and I grow to love them to the degree where my death for them is out of this like humbled love and trust in them. And that's a really interesting version of that story, you know? And it's an extraordinarily compelling one. Very well voiced by your boy, what's his name?
Yeah, Hiroshi Kamiya, one of my favorite voice actors. And yeah, you see why much more in season 2, right? Of where he's able to convey like the arrogance and the warmth of the character so well. It's a great performance.
And he also won at the second annual Seiyu Awards for this, alongside Miyano. He won for supporting actor for this and another role he did that year. And obviously good choice. It's a great performance. You could have picked a lot in Gundam 00, but Tieria is just a special character. It's one of the things that makes that ending, because the last stretch of 00 gets big and it gets crazy and it gets. I even had, I did a tweet about this, like, there are fights in it that just look straight out of Dragon Ball, where the mobile suits are moving fast and doing, like, the energy hits on each other. And I think Tieria, and this maybe sounds weird because we're comparing him to, like, Jesus and all this stuff, he kind of grounds it. He kind of helps tie it all together within the kind of, like, big mythological framework they're working in. And it's just absolutely key, because I remember when 00 started, I looked at the 4 Gundam Meisters and I immediately got a pretty solid read on Setsuna and Alleluia and Lock-On, and I really liked those characters. And then there's this Tieria over here who I wasn't sure about, and I was worried, is this going to be like the weak link of these 4? Fuck no, he's a phenomenal character. There is no weak link of the 4, and he is utterly essential, and that is so cool. And I love that they kind of like set you up that you don't think starting the show that that's where you're going to go with this character, and they really take you on a journey, and that is so cool. And it's so cool that this show has the room to do that with all the other journeys we're talking about, you know?
Yeah, and it's part of the thing you said earlier about the confidence in 00 Gundam. It's like, I think the confidence in saying, we're going to lightly develop Tieria over the course of season 1, because he does change, right? Like, his relationship with Lock-On in the last, like, 5 to 10 episodes is, like, very meaningful. But other than that, he's so in the background, saying this, like, let's have the confidence to keep this character in the background, even though he's one of the Gundam Meisters, right? He's in most of the fight scenes, all that kind of stuff, but we're really not going to dig deep into him until season 2, and just, like, trust that the character is compelling enough on a surface level, and like what we do with him is good enough to keep audience invested, so that way when we really dive into him in season 2, people will fully buy in. And yeah, it's a great character. That also has his season 2 Gundam is one of my favorites, the Cerevi Gundam, because they take the big bulky boy and then they put a giant Gundam head on the back, and I don't know if it's an intentional callback to G Gundam, but it makes me think of the Devil Gundam from G Gundam and all the crazy Gundam heads that it sprouts all over the place, and just saying, just have a giant Gundam face on the back of this thing.
Yes,
just go for it.
And then when it splits out, and there's just a whole other mobile suit in there, but in a very different way than in the one in the first season, it's such a good suit.
Yes, yeah. And I do like the trend in Double O Gundam of having little tiny Gundams that come out of your big Gundam, because the Cerevi Gundam does it, and then Alelia's, the Arios, I think it's called, like that one also has the little tiny one that pops out that Soma pilots. Yeah. And I like the little like baby Gundam that comes out, and I think that's a really good thing.
Russian nesting doll Gundams, we can call them. Let's do more of that. I want the one where it's like a full Russian nesting doll, and there's 5 Gundams, and one of them is very little.
Yeah, and in case you didn't identify the Christian metaphors, they did also name the little one the Seraphim Gundam, just so to make it very clear what we're playing with here.
All right, so Sean, where do we take this next? We've got our whole celestial being family still to talk about, including Miss Sumeragi Lee Noriega, who I posed this question on Twitter. Mm-hmm. Which achievement is more impressive? Captain Bright Noah, who leads the flagships of multiple wars to victory in like 5 successive military conflicts. Or Sumeragi Lee Noriega basically taking on the entire human race and outsmarting them multiple times. And I think I might lean Sumeragi Lee Noriega. She is a smart cookie.
Yeah, because, I mean, the thing is that, like, Captain Bright is just, he's like a military guy, right? Like, and he's very good at his job, or he comes to be very good over the course of the first Gundam, but he's like a military dude at heart. Sumeragi Lee Noriega is like a genius, right? It's a very different character archetype.
Yes.
And yeah, yes, no, I think she is the most capable captain in the history of the Gundam franchise, because she's a super genius, right? Like, she is able to calculate these like tactical forecasts and shit and come up with these battle plans. And particularly in season 2, where in season 1 you would have like the periodic now celestial being is like backed into a corner, and that happens like 2 or 3 times over the course of season 1. That's the entirety of season 2. They are backed into a corner for the entire show, and so you are constantly getting these like Hail Mary strategies from Noriega to like save the day, and it is very satisfying.
Because I loved that aspect of season 1, but in season 2, like, there's so much focus on like battle planning and strategies and tactics, and it is a side of Gundam that I love, but I love that it's made very explicit in Gundam 00 in a way it never is in the other shows. And there's just so many good moments with that. Like episode 3, I think, is the one where they rescue Alleluia from the prison, and her plan is that they dive underwater and flood the prison basically, and like mess with the beam weapons, and then they've got like 300 seconds, 5 minutes, and so you've got the Gundams like the 00 plants itself here at the door, and then Lock-On is sort of flying around doing sniping. There's so many moments like that are just so good, and I love like they put her into this rivalry with Caddy Mannequin, who is a great name, in the middle of the show, and she's the other genius forecaster, and I love the idea that like Caddy Mannequin is there like seeing like there's this enemy that's doing all this stuff, and she's like, there's only one person who could make tactical forecasts like that. It must be Kujo, which is Sumeragi's real name. And then Sumeragi's like, there's only one person who could match my tactical brilliance, and it's Mannequin. And there's just something about that is like so pulpy, and I love it. And of course in there they're able to be sort of not friends but allies in the final fight. God, Sumeragi is a great fucking character.
Yeah, I do love that they just have this whole like Holmes Moriarty story that is happening on the side between these two
yes.
captains for that whole middle stretch of the show. And yeah, no, she's an awesome character. I love the scene she's introduced in episode 2 for season 2, where Setsuna just shows up at Billy Katagidi's house, where she's just been shacking up since the end of season 1, because she's also, she continues to be an alcoholic. And she's just like, oh fuck. And Setsuna's whole thing is like, well, now you have to make a choice, because I have just said that you're a part of celestial beings, so you either come with us or you figure something else out. And yeah, and her just getting kind of like shoved back into this world, and her having to kind of deal with becoming that captain again. I think that's a satisfying arc. And then she just comes up with, again, like, the action sequences in season 2 are just unbelievably good. So she's the one who always comes up with these crazy plans. Like, I think my favorite one, what might be one of the best action sequences in Indie Gundam, is the, like, trench run basically on the first Memento Mori. That whole them fucking like booking along the orbital ring that the Memento Mori laser is on, and her using like every single last trick that they have, the shield bits and Transam, and which Gundams use which Transam, and the Cerevi's like giant cannon and all that to eventually deliver this one sniper shot from Lock-on Stratus right into the heart of the laser. It is an incredibly satisfying action sequence that is only possible because they have this character at the heart of it that can motivate these kinds of like very kind of almost ridiculous strategies, that because she is who she is, you can, as a viewer, kind of go along with it.
Yes, and at that point, we're so deep into the show, we know all of those tools in the toolbox, and seeing her put all those tools together for this impossible mission they've set themselves, and then they pull it off. It's so good. I also love their getting off of Earth back into space episode. Mm-hmm. Those are always great episodes, and having one where it's Sumeragi Lee Noriega having to figure out the strategy of the military side of that, it's a particularly good one here. It's just, she's a great character, and I love that she's still on the bridge with everyone at the end there, because that's where she belongs, because she's damn good at this.
Yeah.
I joked about this on Twitter, but if she was in the world of Gundam Double Zeta and teamed up with Haman Karn, Haman would be ruling completely in full power still by the time of Uso Evan in Victory Gundam. It would be very different.
Yes, no. The Sumeragi Lee Noriega is the kingmaker of Gundam for sure. Like, whoever she sides with is going to be put on that fucking throne.
Yes. Oh, man. Such good stuff. Okay, and then, I mean, most of Celestial Being died, but we do have some still left over here, like Felt, and we have Lasse, and Ian, and now we meet Ian's family, Linda, and what's the little girl's name? Milena, yes. Which at first I was like, oh man, he's letting Milena be on the Ptolemaeus. That seems kind of dangerous. And then you see like where Linda's like, I guess there's no safe place for Milena to be, so why not have her use her skills on the Ptolemaeus?
Yeah, I would rather have your family be, if you're a part of Celestial Being, be on the ship that the Gundams have to protect no matter what. Rather than like the extra ship that is there where a lot of the other staff are on that gets blown up in like the second to last episode. It's like, I want to be on the one that the Gundams come home to, please, thank you.
Yes, but I really do like the supporting cast, and there's good moments with them here, and not as much focus on them maybe as in season 1, but it's a good crew.
Yeah, the one character, and there will be more stuff with her in the movie as well, but like one thing I really like with Felt, I just like that character, I like her design a lot, particularly her like redone, her like more adult design, and she has this really great moment with Setsuna in the last couple of episodes where she comes out and gives him a flower, and as this like kind of good luck charm, but also like this like with like vague romantic intentions, but nothing that's like intense or anything. It's and there's something about that relationship I really like, where she says like, I hope Marina doesn't get jealous or upset that I'm doing this, and Sessa just says we don't have that kind of relationship. And there's something about this very casual kind of like possibility of romance between those two characters that's suggested in the end, that to me is a big part of what the show is doing with this idea of building something and creating something new that is unshackled by the past, is this very normal like love, like not love, but just like this potential relationship between two characters that isn't saddled with trauma, that isn't saddled with like the fate and destiny which you have with like Louise and Saji. You have this very like star-crossed lovers arc, and similar with Anu and Lock-on Stratus. And it's just this like, hey, we're like co-workers, we've been on this ship for a long time, we haven't like talked that much, but you seem cool, here's this flower, try to not die, and then maybe we can hang out when you come back. Like, that's kind of what it is. And that flower
Yeah.
is like the thing that Setsuna sees floating in his cockpit when he is almost knocked out by ribbons. And there's just this very like casual suggestion of like a possible future there that I really like that they use that character for.
Absolutely. So you just mentioned them. We already talked about Saji, but the Luis side of things. I really had no read after season 1 on where they were going to go with Luis. I did not predict this. I didn't really predict anything. I just had no idea. And when you get that moment in the premiere where someone says, like, hey, Warrant Officer Halavy, and I was like, it's just a chill went down my spine, like, oh no, are they doing the thing? And then, like, it locks in, like, what season 2 is going to look like once you realize that. And it's so well done. There is a moment with Luis it's episode 21 at the end where she successfully kills Nina Trinity, who killed her family. Which, you know, it's a good moment of this because it's, in the world of Gundam, it's a very justified killing. Because, like, Nina has never been up to any good, and what Nina did is just, like, so beyond the pale, just bitter attack on this family for no reason, and ruined Luis his whole life. And yet Luis does this, and then she has this break that, like, almost feels like what happens to Camille, but it's even, like, harder because she is still consciously herself, where she's saying, you know, like, Mom, Dad, did I do it? Are you proud of me? And then just breaks down and has nothing. And that to me is like the key moment for that character. But all the stuff between her and Saji, obviously, it's and it's one of those where like I said, she becomes like the former Murasame or something almost. And so I was very worried they were going to kill her at one point, and I really, really did not want that to happen. You know, there's a lot of tension in the season of like, please don't kill Luis. Let them live, and they do live because Gundam 00 is smart about what it's about.
Yeah, no, like Louise, yes, as this like, she's like one part 4 and one part Katejina-san from Victory Gundam, right? Like, because she also has this like much more aggressive edge to her. Like I think the way she's used is so effective in constructing like part of I think the show's argument about like the A-laws and that side of things is this like, it's this group of people that have experienced different kinds of personal traumas or misfortune or whatever it is that have motivated them into this direction of wanting to have this power. And they use this like ideological shield as a way to justify their like abuse of power to other people, but none of them really believe it, right? Like you never get a sense that Louise actually believes in what the A-laws are doing. The same thing with Sergei's son, which is the character she's paired with for most of the show. Is that they are like both just motivated entirely by personal trauma, but are putting on this like ideological get up of, oh, and if we kill enough people in like an exact order, like we will end war and we'll end all this conflict. And it's like, really, that's not at all what she's fighting for. And I think that that's part of what makes that Nina Trinity moment really effective, is that it feels like that's where the character must now fully come face to face with that fact, right? That she has gotten her revenge. She got it brutally, right? She doesn't just kill Nina. She like basically tortures her before she blows up the mobile suit. All the while Nina just like shouting at her like, you fucking idiot, like you're not the only one who suffered, like I was created as a weapon, my entire family was murdered, like I have lived as a servant for all of season 2, and in that time gap it's like Nina has had a shit life too, and it's like you're not the only one who suffered. And then Nina dies and Louise is left with nothing, but must still be an A-Laws member and must still go out and kill and fight. I think it's a very effective dramatization of the like mindset of this person who is taking their traumas and using it to wreak havoc on the world, all while hiding behind this ideological shield, which is basically what fascism is, right? Fascism doesn't really truly have an ideology behind it. It is used as a scapegoating so that you can express violence and authority and control on the world around you, even when it is deeply immoral.
Yeah, fascism is this promise of power as fulfilling, but when you reach the moment that you wanted the power for, what are you left with? And that's what she hits, because the Nina moment, that's what she wanted the power for. And now she has it. And it's not, it's torture. But I think you made a really good point there. They do a good job, like, humanizing the characters on the A-Laws. Not excusing them, but humanizing. Like, Andre and Luis particularly, and some of the other characters we see, are not like the Titans are pretty just outright evil in Zeta Gundam, you know, and obviously Rekkoa, I guess to a certain degree, although Rekkoa is more on the side of
Shiroko.
Shiroko, but like you know, Andre is more fleshed out and sympathetic than Jared Mesa, right? And there's just stuff like that where. And that makes their argument, you know, even more sort of airtight in what they're looking at, because it's not saying there's no logic to where like Luis and Andre are coming from in joining this group. And that's an acknowledgement that is like, as we deal with the rise of fascism around the globe in 2020, this is a good thing to maybe talk about.
Yeah, but like part of it is that it's like it makes the characters to me like more despicable because you can see their humanity, right? Because you can see where they're coming from, but how just deeply wrong they are, and that they're not, you know, like when you say like the Titans in Zeta Gundam just feel evil, like it makes me think of Basque-Om, right? Like Basque-Om in Zeta Gundam is this like almost like caricature of this like evil fascist dude, whereas these are like people, but you see how fucked up they are by following this thing. And it's one of the effective structural tricks of Double O is you get that both with Louise, because you see where she came from not being involved with the military, but you also have all the characters that started as representatives of the individual military factions in season 1 that are consolidated in the Federation. Right. So that's like Sergei and then Katie, Mannequin, and you have them, so you know where these people come from and can see how they just get kind of eaten up by this machine because they were part of an organization that they maybe originally believed in, but now that the organization has changed, they are just thrust along through momentum. And it's like part of Katie Mannequin's whole arc is her having to come to realize that it's like you can't just do that. You can't just like accept that. You can't just become a part of that, like a cog in the wheel of that machine when the machine itself has changed. I mean, the machine she was a part of originally was bad, but it has gotten much worse by the time you get to season 2. But she's just sort of continued to rise through the ranks because that's the life that she leads. That's like that like quiet complacency by those characters you met in season 1 that they have to come to terms with, that they are now like part of something much bigger and much worse in season 2.
And that's what I mean, you know, when I said earlier that everybody, no matter how big or small a character, has to make that choice.
Yeah.
And I think this is where we need to bring in like the trinity of Sergei, Marie / Soma, and Andre, and also Katie Mannequin a little bit, because you mentioned Katie, you know, she is someone who is like starting to realize how bad all this shit is over the course of the season. But when you get to what I predict we are going to agree is the best episode of Gundam 00, Within the Scattering Light, which is season 2, episode 17. Mm-hmm. And the A-Laws do something just so utterly beyond the... I mean, they've already done it with the fucking space laser and blowing apart the Middle East, but they do the blowing up all the hostages in the tower. And you have Katie who just pieces out. That's it. Just like, she takes all of her troops and leaves, and we don't see them again until near the end, but she has, like, we learn in the following episode, like, she was just done. And in that same one is where Andre kills his father. Yeah. And so it's a very stark version of this. But let's build back up to that. Let's start with Sergei for a second and Soma, because it's pretty early in the season. You get the episode where Soma leaves and goes back to Celestial Being and says goodbye to Sergei. And you even have, that's the first use of our insert song for this season. And you do like a big flashback and all that stuff. And I just, man alive, Sergei Smirnov is a great character. That relationship with Soma is so interesting and well done. And when you get to her saying, I would have liked to have been your daughter, and then, but with, you know, this can't work anymore. Fucking hell is so good. It's so good.
Yeah, especially I love when you get those characters reintroduced into season 2, and it's them both in this like wintry cabin, like drinking hot chocolate or coffee or whatever, and like talking very cryptically around this, like, you know, what is heavily implied to be this like adoption thing that he wants to do. And then that's when Andre shows up with the orders that says Soma Purus is to become a member of the A-Laws or whatever. Yeah, like their relationship, which was so compelling in season 1, and seeing that jump in that they have lived this life together effectively as father and daughter, even if it wasn't technically in the law, and then having them slowly have to kind of be ripped apart over the course of season 2, until Sergei is killed, and then that becomes Marie/Soma's motivation for the second half. Yeah, it is definitely like one of like the biggest emotional gut punches, and that's what like it's one of the things that feels the most Tomino-esque to me in Double O Season 2 is everything connected to Sergei's death. It is like the specific kind of tragedy and tragic that it plays on that is I think very familiar if you are a Gundam fan, but it is what I think it's one that we've not seen in a while, a death that feels that brutal because of how well it has been built up, why it's happening, and what the emotional connections are coming into that tragedy.
And Sergei, just one, Uncho Ishizuka, I just love that finally he's in Gundam, and it is just beyond the perfect role for him. You know, like, God, what a great voice actor, and rest in peace, Ishizuka-san. Great actor, great performance as Sergei. And Sergei is one of the most deeply good people in this world. And yet what's complicated about that is that you also see that someone who is deeply good can have been deeply imperfect and made very, very human mistakes. And like in Season 2, he's never actively committing the atrocities or anything, but he's not sure how to... He's not the guy who leads the coup either. He's not the guy who like quite knows how to move in this world. Although he's okay with like letting Marie go to celestial being and that kind of stuff. And just one of my favorite characters out of this show. And then you get Andre, and this side of it though, where Andre, there's a reason why Andre isn't in Season 1. And it's because he has to come in Season 2 to challenge your conception of Sergei and say, Sergei is a deeply, deeply good person, but Andre is hurt by this man and hates him, and it's not without reason. And the reason is that Sergei had to make this impossible fucking choice with the mother character, and then didn't really have the emotional language to figure out how to reconnect with his son. And it is this like thing that is there that hangs over all of this. And it is just one of the most, this entire triangle of characters we're talking about, and the kind of tragedy you just mentioned, Sean, and what makes this feel so Tomino is it's so human in like its complexities and messiness, you know?
Yeah, and it's with Sergei this sense of, you know, I said this last episode, that Sergei, he's effectively the Ramba Rao character, not in the sense of like the plot is not Ramba Rao-esque, you know, he doesn't challenge Setsuna or any of that shit. He has almost nothing to do with Setsuna at all. But his characterization is Ramba Rao, right? He's the guy who is the stand-up dude, but he's a part of the enemy faction, but he's the military guy who, like, has this loyalty to the people who serve under him. He has this, like, sort of, like, fortitude, and you can't help but respect him because he has this clear vision of, like, who he is and what he's serving, even if what he's serving ultimately is wrong. But it's that part of... He allows himself very deliberately to be a cog in the military machine, right? Like, he almost takes pride in it because he is a soldier, like, through and through. He takes the orders, he does the orders, and he follows through on them. And even if that ends up with the death of his wife, right? Like, that's what he had to do as a soldier. And he kind of can't see anything outside of that context, no matter how hard he tries to, right? I think it's one of the reasons why the character almost like has to die in Season 2 is because he is a character who cannot change, right? Like, this is a season about having to find a way to make a change, hopefully for the better or for the worse, you know, depending on which side you're on. But he is someone who's like, he can't change because he just takes orders. And it's like one of the biggest tragedies in his whole death is that part of it is just this like simple misunderstanding where, I mean, Sergei is sent to that space elevator effectively to die because the higher-ups don't really believe in him anymore, and he's this old relic, and they can't trust on him to be a member, to, like, believe in the A-Law side of the Federation. So they send him there effectively to get killed because they're going to blow up the whole fucking thing. But he just goes there as a soldier, never to join the coup. He never supports the coup. He doesn't really fight against them either, but he just goes there to give a message, and that's the only reason he's there. But Andre thinks that because Sergei's there that he's a part of the rebellion, when that is something that Sergei never would have done. Like, if he had lived and you had gone on for 1 million more episodes of Double O Gundam, you could never, I think, convincingly write a story where Sergei Smirnov went against the military. It's just not a part of who he is as a character. And so he has to be killed because he cannot change and move on from the like thing he understands how to be, which is just being a soldier.
And yet within that, his killing is Andre very definitively making a choice for the worse.
Yeah.
And becoming the worst version of himself, which is a vindictive fascist, who just wields the power for the power's sake, almost, He gets nothing out of killing his dad. Nothing.
Yeah.
Other than this, like, violent satisfaction.
I mean, that's the most clear illustration of what I was saying, of that they use ideology as this shield, where he doesn't take a single second to try to actually confirm whether or not Sergei is part of the rebellion, because that's not why he killed him, right? He killed him because he hates his dad, and he has this trauma associated with the death of his mother and this feeling of emotional abandonment. It had nothing to do with protecting the world or peace or whatever their like ideological push is. It's entirely about him like wielding power in order to make himself feel in control, and that's it. And it's one thing I may be disappointed with in Double O Gundam is I really wish that character was forced to fully come to terms with, like, I wish that he came to know that he killed his father over a misunderstanding, because he never does. Yeah. And there's something about that is like, I think that maybe that's better that the show doesn't, because it's like kind of more brutal that way. But I have this like Andre to me is like one of the most despicable Gundam characters. Like, he is basically like if you took Hathaway from Char's Counterattack and Jared from Zeta Gundam and meshed them together into this one fucking man-child idiot who kills his fucking like the person he really shouldn't kill. It's like fucking Andre sucks. And he does get some comeuppance, but he doesn't get the like emotional destruction he deserves by coming to understand that he killed his father for no reason.
I do think Andre gets maybe a little lost in the shuffle in the closing episodes, just because like I don't know what I need it to be, if it's what you're saying or something else, but I feel like there needed to be a sense of closure there. Maybe that's in the movie, I don't know, but like, as it is, his sort of last, like, Marie does get through to him and has this moment where it's like, you didn't consider what he was feeling either. And he does have this moment during the, like, flow of understanding that Setsuna, like, sends out in that penultimate episode of having this, like, little moment of realizing why his dad was so closed off. But I feel like that moment isn't fully followed through on, and it's just one where, yeah, there's a little bit of disappointment there, but it is a bold character and episode and all of that, yeah. It is one of the best story arcs in season 2, and yes, I agree that I think that episode within the Scattering Light is the best episode in the season. Like, it's the one that it just kind of feels like a lot like the Colony Drop episode in Double Zeta, just like the... Because all that stuff we just talked about mostly just happens at the end of the episode. Most of that episode is like all the different factions desperately trying to just destroy the debris from the space elevator, from like crushing multiple different highly populated cities in that whole area. The desperation across that whole episode is so powerful. It's a stunning episode. That's the one that most powerfully to me feels like, how did they animate this? Mm-hmm. This is unbelievable. It would be unbelievable today or in any era. Like, and that's the same way I feel about that episode of Double Zeta, is like, how did they pull this off? Because the visual scale of what they're working with is just so immense. And it is great. And it just gets to that sense of like tragedy and chaos and darkness and, when Ribbons pulls the trigger basically and tells him to do it, and that tower starts coming down and you just see all these like pieces just breaking off of it as it goes down to Earth. It feels like they chose the design of a space elevator at the beginning of Double O so that they could do that sequence later on, because it is so dramatic and powerful, and so many like characters are coming together in that moment, and so many things are bouncing off one another. That is an episode where like I watched that and the one before it in one sitting, and I had been planning to watch more, and I had to just like go take a walk. Like, it was just like that episode was too much to keep watching after that point. And they do another little time jump in, even like that episode is so powerful that we pick up 4 months later. But good God, it is one of the all-time masterpiece Gundam episodes. Yeah,
that episode has one of my favorite shots in any Gundam thing, where it like zooms out to the whole planet and you get the context for like the scale of what's happened, where you see the amount of like smoke that's generated from the destruction of the space elevator and then blowing up all the bits and pieces as it's falling, and it's like covering half a continent. And it's like really breathtaking where it puts into perspective the scale of destruction you're dealing with. That I think it's like the first time it's made me feel that way since Victory Gundam, where Victory Gundam also does a good job of like making you really think about, okay, like once like military technology and the human population in like space and all that shit, once you get to that point, like you can start seeing destruction on this scale that is effectively unimaginable. And that's, I think they just do a really good job of that in that episode.
I also think that episode and the one before it, dealing with the whole coup, thematically also brings home so much of what the series is about, where the main goal of that coup d'etat that they do is to make people aware. It is not that they think they're going to solve it themselves, and like pretty clearly, like Sergei's friend doesn't expect to survive this. And what it is we need to rub this in the face of the public that this is what their government is doing. This is what they're doing in the Middle East. This is what they're doing around the world. These are the kind of atrocities they have committed. They need to know this, and they are responsible. And there's dialogue that character has that is just so pointed and like reads to me as such a pointed critique of like the Iraq War, and I think complicity around the world and you know, in America obviously, but in other parts of the world too, for what has been going on. And it is just incredibly powerful to see something like that sharp, to the point of feeling like borderline radical in terms of the politics of it for the time. You know, here I have some of the quotes here where Sergei asks him, "Why have you taken innocent civilians hostage?" And he says, "They're not innocent. They're not innocent at all. Content with their wealth, they accept the Assembly's policies without question. This led to the government's corruption. It's the folly of these citizens that allowed the rise of an organization like the A-Laws. We must open their eyes and show them the truth, even if the lesson is accompanied by pain. The government and the military must have responsible citizens in order to function properly. If this is what it takes to open their eyes, I will happily sacrifice myself." I can't believe that's in a mainstream work of fiction. Japan, America, anywhere. That is a fairly radical political message for your big mechs fighting show.
Yeah,
you know?
I think it connects to, I think, one of like the kind of critiques or arguments at the heart of the show. I think that is partially like self-critical of past Gundams, and part of what I was saying of like the show's saying like we need to move past that understanding because it's not true or it's not reflective of the world anymore, is like part of the way it's like recontextualizing some of the new type-ish stuff of transcending consciousness and us understanding each other on this deeper level. It's like part of that very specifically is saying that means that people who have lived in privilege must be made to suffer the way that the people that have suffered from their privilege have suffered, right? Like you cannot be Sanji and live this life ignorant of war and all these things that you are like quietly growing fat off of, and then like have Setsuna come down from on high and connect everybody's consciousness together, and it's just like, oh, we just figured each other out. It's like, no, Sanji has to suffer. He needs his face shoved into the dirt. He has to come to understand that his actions have had consequences and people have died because of him. Blood is on his hands. The same it is on my hands and your hands, Jonathan. We pay American taxes. Our fucking money has killed people around the world. Like, you can't live in ignorance of that fact that you live in that system. And it's like, if you sit abstract from that and don't have that understanding of suffering that someone like the Gundam Meisters do, who have been deeply affected by war on a personal level, you will never get the kind of understanding you need to achieve the new type, like utopia or whatever that Gundam like yearns for. And that's part of what that general is saying with the coup. It's like, these people are not innocent. They have grown fat on the back of war and the suffering of people that they don't know about on the other side of the world that they conveniently ignore. It's like, but they are still culpable in that, and they must, like he's saying, it's like, even if it means that they must feel pain because they have to suffer in that way, or they will never be able to come to that understanding.
I feel like this is one of the ways this show is just so prescient, is this is something that I feel like America is grappling with right now, after the year we just had in 2020, where I think, and we'll see, you know, the full political fallout of this, and where it winds up going. It could be good, it could be bad. But America pretty well got its face rubbed in our own sins in the last year. In that, okay, we got angry and elected this idiot piece of shit president, and he killed 500,000 Americans, and we all had to stay inside for a year and suffer because of the absolute breaking of our government. And there's that top level of Trump being the most incompetent person possible and letting all these people die without a care in the fucking world. But then there are all the systems layered on top that we have built that we are ignorant of our healthcare systems and our welfare systems that we had to be fucking rebuilding on the fly over the last year when we had 15% unemployment because of the coronavirus. And all of our like federalist sort of like state-run systems that all break down when you don't have a strong central government, and all the ways we don't take care of each other that we needed to do, and we had to get our fucking faces rubbed in that the last year. And again, you know, not all people suffering equally, very obviously, but you know, seeing like or like just a couple weeks ago in Texas, where you know there's a hurricane and Texas is out without water or power for days and weeks on end, and people are freezing to death in their homes in a state that is, you know, one of the richest in the world and should be able to provide for its citizens but doesn't. And it's like there's something about that, like there's been, I think, a feeling for so many people this last year of, even if you know thought you were like woke and got it, of like seeing the like truth laid bare is such a present concern, and it's something Gundam 00 is so invested in talking about, is that idea of the truth laid bare, and then what do you do with it. It's a moment for choosing, you might say.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Yeah, it is a show that feels, it is like continues to be extremely relevant, partially because I think we are still in the midst of the same political moment that the show itself was made in. Yeah, that it is. And it is especially like, I think like a lot of, because I know this is true of you, Jonathan, I know it's true of me, and I think it's true of a lot of people our age, is I think we're like at this point where we're like thinking back on a lot of stuff from the Bush era specifically, and like the Iraq War in that, because it's now been it's been a long time, right? In September this year, 9/11 will have happened 20 years ago. Like it's this time of where, you know, if the like nostalgia thing, the like, you know, the thing is like, oh, it's every 20 years is when like that the nostalgia comes in, as like Greece for the 1970s, looking back on the 50s, like that shit. If that's accurate, that means that in this September, 9/11 will be part of our nostalgic lens, right? It'll be part of the like the era of nostalgia. I don't know if that will be actually accurate, because I think the way that nostalgia works has like changed a lot in the modern era media, but like I think it's caused a lot of us to look back on that period right now, and I think 00 Gundam has been like a very rich show to be watching while I've been kind of reflective of that stuff, for these exact reasons of like really making, I think, this very hard-lined argument about like everybody's complicitness in what happened, at least that like everybody that lived in like this sphere, Japan and America, again, like NATO states and places like that. Yeah, it's a really remarkable show.
And then, of course, you know, that gives way to all the stuff about media manipulation that we get, and, you know, pinning things on terrorists and terrorism that aren't actually issues of that. And, you know, it's this show has what it has in its sights. It is not subtle, or it's not playing games with what it's talking about. It's very direct about it.
Yeah, you know? Like there's in that section, because around that section is where the memento mori is being used, and it's destroying different Middle Eastern nations. And there's like a line that a character has that is basically just feels like they're reading out of like a, like, you know, like political science, like breakdown of American foreign policy from this period. Like there's just like multiple lines that characters have of talking about the way that the Middle East is being destabilized by foreign powers for their own benefit. In the way that like Azerbaijan, right, is destroyed by Ali al-Sanchez early in season 2, and you hear like characters talking about like puppet governments being installed by the Federation, and all that shit is like, which is what we fucking did in the Middle East, like not even just in the Iraq War, before the Iraq War, during the Cold War. Like we've done that in multiple states around the whole nation states around the whole world. And it's like there is a very clear directness to a lot of that stuff around that era, like section of the show where they're talking about what the memento mori's effect is and how people are using it to destabilize the Middle East.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we've gone almost 2 hours into season 2, and we went a full 2 hours in season 1. without talking about Ribbons Allmark.
Yeah, right. You want
So
to do
maybe
this now?
it is. Maybe it's time. I think it's just time. There's other characters. We'll get to all our other favorites. We haven't talked about Mr. Bushido yet. We'll get there. Sean, the other night, I'm watching Gundam 00, and there's a character in the middle of this season who's paired up with Katie Mannequin, who's like, and he's one of the like generals or something, and he's voiced by Kazuki Yao, and Kazuki Yao in Gundam was Judo Ashita. And of course, he's in everything now. He's a very famous voice actor. You might know him as Frankie in One Piece. He's in lots of different things. There's actually several characters in One Piece because they just, every time they had a weirdo in One Piece, they would cast Kazuki Yao, and then he played the ultimate weirdo, which is Frankie. And I noticed it's Kazuki Yao, and I was intrigued by this, and I'm like, oh, have there been other Gundam boys who have come back and played other characters? And immediately I thought, well, okay, there was Tomokazu Seki, who did, he's the main character in G Gundam, and then he is also in Seed. So there's that. But I made that tweet, and then you went, Jonathan, we're going to talk about this. And then a bunch of other people went, is he joking? What is he talking about? And I'm like, what's going on? What joke am I not in on? And then I start looking it up, and the first thing I Google is Toru Furia Gundam, because I'm like, are they saying some other Gundam boy is in this? And I see the words, Toru Furia, Ribbons Allmark. And the phone drops from my hand in slow motion as my mouth moves agape, and you can just see like my brain flashing through 30 episodes of Gundam 00 at this point, going, oh my god, that's Toru Furia? What? Holy cow, Sean, this is the biggest mindfuck in the history of Gundam. How did they pull this off? It is amazing. It is amazing. I think about it. I've finished the show. I think I've digested this, but now I start talking about it again, and it's just like, I can't. My brain can't process what they did here. It's so cool.
Yeah, because, what I think the thing that's funny about it is I had, like, a relatively similar experience, just, like, not on Twitter with that, with Ribbons, where for most of Double O Gundam, like, I would hear his voice, and there'd be something about it that I'm like, there's something here. There's something weird. But, like, in a way of, like, I recognize this voice, but when you've watched, like, a billion fucking anime shows, like I have, you recognize a voice in everything, right? Particularly if it's from this period from, like, the mid-2000s to now. It's like, well, every fucking actor has been in a million shows that I've watched and whatever. So it's like, I'm sure it's something. And then the closer it gets to the ending, the more it's like, no, there's something very specific about this show or about this character, this voice, that's like, it's really bugging me. And I think it was like 4 or 5 episodes from the ending, I looked up the actor and then saw it was Toru Furia. I'm like, what the fuck? It's Amuro? How is that even possible? So it's like I got to have that very embarrassing experience just entirely off Twitter. But you can now imagine, Jonathan, my experience when I saw your tweet, because I have it pulled up in front of me, because I read this and there was no way I could not respond to this tweet because it was such a perfect fucking setup, where you just say, is Kazuki Yao the only voice actor to play a Gundam protagonist, Judo, and then return to the series in a different role later on? He's Arbor Lent in Gundam 00, and very funny to hear, doing the more distinctive weirdo voice he became known for post-Double Zeta. And I read that, I'm like, well, I mean, yeah, no, there is another Gundam protagonist who's played a very different role in another Gundam show, and it happens to be the one you're currently watching. And like, how do you read that tweet and not respond to it? So I just responded, we will revisit this tweet in the near future. And then about 30 minutes later, you had your tweet being like, okay, yes, I'm an idiot. Oh my god, yes, okay, I get it now. What the fuck? How is this even possible? One of my favorite... it's this, and then it was very similar to the Mudla Flaga stuff from Sea Destiny, of you tweeting about him and being like, Jonathan, he's not a clone. You need to know this. I need you to understand this before we do the podcast, because I'm very glad that you looked up the Ribbons thing and figured it out, because I think it would have been hard to talk about Ribbons if you had the revelation on the podcast, because it would be the only thing we'd be able to talk about with that character.
No, we would be stopping the recording, and I would be going and rewatching the entire series in one sitting, trying to figure it out.
Yeah,
because
it is a pretty mind blowing performance. And there's
you say it's Amuro. It's not. It's Toru Furia. Like, he's in everything. He's Yamcha. He's Amuro. He's the guy in. He's in everything.
He's Seiya in Saint Seiya. He's one of the main characters in fucking Detective Conan. Like, yes, he is in every show, particularly from like the 70s and 80s.
yeah, if you watch anime, you've heard Toru Furuya, and it is like, and I don't even think, I think of him as an actor with a lot of range, but I don't think of him as a chameleon in that way of like where I would never be able to tell who it is. And it's not that his voice is indistinguishable. Like once you know it, it's very clearly him. But it's the way he's talking, it's the writing, it's the verbiage, it's the inflection. It is a crazy flex of a performance. Like it is a master, legend voice actor just taking everyone to school. Is him as Ribbons Allmark, basically, is how I would describe it. It is a titanically good performance.
Yeah. And there's a little bit of like a story about how it came to be. So you know, I think like multiple different Gundam things had tried to get him to play a non-Amuro role in other Gundam things because it's fucking Toru Furuya, and he kind of turned it down multiple times, and he never like went to audition for other Gundam shows. He's just like, I did my Amuro stuff. Like I think it would feel weird. Like people would like compare it to Amuro and all this kind of stuff. And then it was having Shuichi Ikeda play the chairman Durandal in the Destiny. That's kind of been like, okay, it's maybe something that you can do. And then also the director, or I think it was the producer for the show, that like initially said, well, we'll just have you play the narrator, and that's it. And he was like, okay, yeah, I'll do the narrator, like I'll do the voiceover at the end of the episode, and maybe like do the 0079 and all that shit. And as far as I know, that was the original plan. And I don't think there's like a like clear like reason given. I think partially maybe there's like a contractual thing that they can't say specifically, but it seems like there was an actor that they had originally cast to play Ribbons that fell through for whatever reason, and then they offered the role to Toru Furuya, and he decided to do it. But one of the things he did when he decided to do it was he used a pseudonym. So he is cast under the name Noboru Sogetsu, which is a pseudonym he has used for a couple of different roles. And by like using the pseudonym, I mean that he gave interviews for the show, like using this pseudonym as like kind of playing this character almost. And I brought that in the Zoom chat. I gave you a link to the official Twitter account that, as far as I know, is run by Toru Furuya, because I wanted you to see the picture, the profile icon, God. Which is just Toru Furuya wearing sunglasses.
It's so Noboru Sogetsu at Noboru_Sogetsu. His profile pic is Toru Furuya in a suit with a pocket square, and then he has these white like aviator sunglasses on, and his head is slightly cocked, and it is the greatest fucking thing. Oh my god. Yeah.
And so he like did like some interviews like wearing sunglasses and stuff, and obviously everybody knew that it was really him. It was a fun bit. Like even in that Gundam 40th anniversary thing, there's a part, this is not in the section that I did the subtitles for, but he like continues to play this joke for that there. And yeah, and so in like the credits for all 50 episodes of 00 Gundam, like he is credited as Noboru Sogetsu. And partially it's just a way to try to like prevent the Amuro stuff from being too associated with the role in the show, and like prevent people from speculating like, is it really secretly like a UC Gundam thing or something crazy like that. Because unless you look it up or like you're kind of in on it, it is very, very hard to tell that it's him. And it's a really phenomenal performance. One other thing I'll say really quick about the Twitter thing, I guess like two things. One is apparently where the name came from is it's a name that he used as like an account name on different video games that he played online. Like there's the free-to-play Gundam online game that's very popular in Japan called like Battle Operations, that he used this name when he would play that game. And the other thing I'll say about this Twitter account is part of the way I kind of discovered this and realized that this was an official account is that I follow Nakamoto Yuichi on Twitter, who's the voice actor for Mr. Bushido. And so when I looked at this account, I saw that Twitter tells you if you follow people, if they follow the account you're looking at, and it's Nakamoto Yuichi follows this account. If you look at the 12 accounts that the Noboru Sogetsu account follows, he only follows 12, and one of them is also Nakamoto Yuichi. So I feel like he's very in on this joke, which is funny because if you know him, like he is a massive otaku that is like super, super, super into Gundam. So it is very heartwarming to me that the fake, like it's not a fake account because it is Toru Furuya that actually runs this Twitter account, but that it follows him back, I think is very adorable.
That is wonderful and wholesome, and that is what we need in the world right now. That is great. But man, I mean, so going back to the Durandal thing, because that's where this started. Like, so Shuichi Ikeda plays Chairman Durandal in Seed Destiny, and one of my big theses about Seed Destiny when we talked about it is that one of that show's biggest mistakes is casting Shuichi Ikeda, not because Ikeda isn't one of the best voice actors alive, but because they lean on him too hard. They have him play exactly to type, exactly what you would expect from Shuichi Ikeda. They don't push him as an actor, which we know he can be pushed. It's Shuichi fucking Ikeda. And because of that, they like underwrite Durandal and they just let Ikeda do it, and it makes the show very lazy on that level. And it feels like Double O takes the exact opposite tact to a T of this is not a Toru Furuya character type. This is nothing like Amuro. This doesn't sound like him. This doesn't talk like him. The verbiage is totally different. And it becomes like, I assume everybody who's ever watched Gundam 00 has the mindfuck moment of, oh my god, that's Amuro. And they use it to just such great effect. And it is one of those things where, like, Gundam 00 being, we have talked all about, like, geopolitics and all this serious stuff, and yet it is a show with a villain named Ribbons Allmark, who is a little boy with green hair. And, like, if that performance didn't work and didn't sell Ribbons Allmark, the show maybe falls apart. And so it just speaks to just how good it is that he sells it, and you hear Ribbons open his mouth and talk, and you're like, yeah, this is some weird god kid who's come from the heavens to fucking destroy us all, and it just works.
Yeah, no, because Ribbons is where you get a lot of the, like, Christian mythology stuff comes in, where he is, like, this very, like, Lucifer, fallen angel type character, right? That he's... And it's really effective. I love the, like, layers of what they do with it, of where... You know, so in that schema, if you're looking at it like the Christian metaphoric type stuff that they do, right, you have Aeolia Schuhenberg and Veda kind of together are God, right? That Aeolia Schuhenberg is this guy from fucking hundreds of years ago who is somehow able to, like, predict everything that's happened up to this point, and has constructed this grand design, right? And it's like that, like, master plan that God is meant to have that nobody else can understand or do anything about, and that whenever you're trying to fight against the plan, you're actually furthering the plan, right? Because it's God, he's omnipotent, and that's very much what the Aeolia character is meant to be. And so Ribbons, as this entity that, like, is trying to defy God and take I just said God, trying to defy Aeolia and take over the plan for himself and rule himself instead of humanity that is meant to sort of ascend eventually, that he wants to have that power and control, which is very much Lucifer, right? Lucifer is jealous of God. He doesn't understand or believe in God's plan. He doesn't care about the humans. He just wants to fuck all that shit up, so he becomes a serpent in the Garden of Eden, all that stuff. And it's very much that same kind of design. But one thing I love is that then Ribbons creates these additional innovators in his own image that he's using as those soldiers, and one of them, Regina Regetta, you eventually find out it's like kind of teams up with Tieria at some point, is trying to do the same thing to Ribbons that Ribbons did to Aeolia, right? And like this cycle of control and betrayal, and this need to be the one who stands at the top of all things and controls everything and builds the world in their image. I think the only reason all that stuff works is because the Ribbons character is so well put together. He's so convincing and believable, and Toru Furuya's performance is so compelling of this character that feels all-powerful, that feels all-knowing, and yet also you can tell the arrogance, right? The arrogance of Satan or whatever, that eventually that what you're doing will never be fruitful, that you are actually furthering the plan that God has created, because it's that way that capital G God works. And so that those two sides of the character, that at one time you feel them all powerful, undefiable, like they are everything. And then at the same time you can see deeply the arrogance the character holds that's going to be their downfall. And holding those two things in balance is like what you need to have a good Satan archetype character. And this is like one of my favorites. Like I really enjoy this kind of like Christian mythological story that leans more into the Old Testament side stuff like this, that is about the arrogance of these characters about the unknowability of this like distant god, and it's like a bit more cold and kind of cruel feeling as some of the stuff that Paradise Lost pulls on in its early sections. That I feel like this is pulling on some of that same material with this Ribbons character, that to me is very, very compelling.
I agree 100%. And like, I love that way of framing it, of like, he is the guy who thinks he's going to overtake God, but is all part of the plan, because of course, without Ribbons, Setsuna does not ascend to become a real innovator, and that is ultimately what was all about. And yeah, it is, and I just love that like Toru Furuya on one side is Amuro, who is like the ultimate Gundam hero, and then he is also Satan in this show, and that is part of what makes it such an out-of-type performance. And it is so good. And then I love all of his crazy innovators he's got on his side who have the nuttiest set of names. Let me look up really quickly all the names of the innovators, because my favorite one is Revival, because that one is just fucking hilarious. And I love how they say it in Japanese. Revivaru is great. But let's see. We have Gundam Wiki is being assholes about this, and the innovators are not the same as the innovades. So now I have to look that up.
Yeah, well, you've got some like Regina Regetta. You've got a new returner also is a very good name. Yes. And one of the funniest things is no character just immediately pegging a new returner as like some sort of inhuman creature because of how fucking absurd her name is.
Okay, so I've got it. It's Ribbons Allmark, Regina Regetta, which every time Toru Furuya says that name, it's amazing. Revival, Hiling Care.
I think you mean healing care, Jonathan.
Healing care. Bring Stabity, which is almost Bring Stability, but it's Bring Stabity. Divine Nova, a new returner, and of course, we can't forget about them, Sean, the Gaga Forces. Not the name of Lady Gaga's fan base. Those are all the like little red-haired boys who go out in the suits that Ribbons has created, and this is so crazy.
Yes, no, they're all great. They're all these like weird angel children that like, I like that they all have like this very like bright kind of pastel hair colors and stuff like that like very much set them apart from the other character designs that have like, you'll have some characters that have like slightly kind of reddish hair, or maybe like something that's a little bit more on the blue or green side, or I think Felt has like pink hair, but it's all like relatively muted colors. And then you have these people with like this like fucking just bright green, bright blue, bright red hair that's very like a very different anime style almost that they're like depicted in.
It's something Gundam 00 gets about Gundam, which is that since the beginning, from Gundam 79 on, you gotta have a dash of ludicrousness in your Gundam. That is part of like the recipe, is that Gundam 79 is this serious show in a lot of ways. It deals with death very realistically. It deals with the idea of child soldiers and the trauma of war, and all of these big ideas, the ascension of humanity. But it also has a guy named Ron Morale and his dad Jimba. It's got a boy on the ship named Job John. It does this. It's got a character named Shar Aznable dressed to the nines in a mask who rides around in a red mobile suit that's 3 times better than everyone else's mobile suit. So yes, Gundam should have a character named Revival, because why the fuck not? That is part of the recipe of Gundam.
Yeah, and that's like, I think that's part of what they intentionally do with season 2, is that they put a little bit more of that like silliness in there, right? Like I think it's a very intentional choice that they make everything more heightened and exaggerated, including that like silly element that Gundam typically has and I think should have, because it's part of the secret sauce that like kind of has everything stick together. But keeping with the Ribbons stuff, one of the things I really love with Ribbons is that for most of it, he's very, very far from Amuro. But then once you get deeper into the show, they do a couple of things that like very like specifically bring him towards Amuro. Of he is the first Gundam pilot, right? He is the pilot of the O Gundam. That is the Gundam that came down from on high that Setsuna saw in flashbacks in season 1. That kind of gave him this fanatical obsession with the Gundam, and he wants to be the Gundam, and eventually leads him to be Celestial Being. And Ribbons effectively tells him straight up, is like, I like intentionally spared your life. Like, I was in that cockpit and I saw you too. I let you live because of the expression, the way you looked at me and at the Gundam. And then like I've like kind of set you on that path deliberately to be a Gundam Meister because it amused me to do so. And this way that he tries to play God with, you know, the Setsuna character very specifically, but the way that it's sort of using that iconography of Gundam, right? That to this child Setsuna, the Gundam is this divine entity that comes down and saves you from war. And a lot of Setsuna's arc, particularly in season 2, is having to realize, you know, when he in season 1 is saying over and over again, there is no God. Where's your God, Alial Sanchez? And him very like pointedly trying to defy that. At the same time, he was doing the exact same thing, right? He had made the Gundam an idol that he was effectively worshiping, that he was like living his life for. And that's something he has to learn to discard in season 2, is to let that go. And it's like the Gundam is not divine. Gundam is not holy. Like Gundam, both like, you know, within the show, the thing, and then for us, like the text of Gundam, the historical franchise, is not something that is set in stone, that must be worshipped. It's something that should evolve and change over time. And that's part of what it does then with having Ribbons. In the end, he has one of the fucking sickest mobile suits ever, which is his mobile suit that turns into a gun cannon and then into a like big red evil Gundam. And it kind of switches between those modes. And then he abandons that and gets into the O Gundam, and Setsuna must like literally overcome the history of Gundam embodied in the 0079 design. It's a very cool way of using that Gundam legacy and that knowledge of Todofuria, playing the character and kind of bringing it in line with the themes of the show, that I think just is like really fucking awesome.
Absolutely. I mean, it is stark and it is powerful. The ending of this show, the climax being the new 00 Gundam facing down the O Gundam and getting its big, you know, saber in hand and rushing forward for that final confrontation. It is a striking thing. And Toru Furuya does just like some very subtle stuff once Ribbons gets in the mobile suit, of like bringing back a little bit of like, if you hadn't realized it by now, that's where you would hit it, where it would hit you. Like, okay, that's Amuro, that's Toru Furuya, you know?
Yeah.
It's so smart.
Yeah, I mean, there's in that fight, there's specifically, I think, some of that great staging where they mirror the Ramba Rao fight where the cockpits get slashed open.
Yep.
And then
so good.
The O Gundam throws its shield away and uses this two-handed stance with the beam saber. That is the stance that Amuro takes in the Ramba Rao fight where he dodges and cuts off the Goof's arms. It's like the exact same thing. It's very, very good callback. It's like, it's a very fun way to play with the iconography of Gundam now that, you know, this show was made like 30 years after the original, while not being cloying but being additive to what the show is trying to say.
Absolutely. And I think at the same time, though, I would say this is totally a Gundam you could watch having seen nothing else, you know? And it's really good that way. In the way that, like, it would be really hard for me to recommend After War Gundam X to a newbie because it is so in conversation. This is in conversation while also being fully its own thing, and that is an accomplishment in and of itself.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, absolutely. It's a thing where if that knowledge of the Gundam franchise makes those moments richer, but those moments work within the context of this story alone, whether you know the history of it or not.
Yeah, absolutely. Because like I've been, my brother watched the original Gundam 79 and has not. He's been very busy and has not, like, he's been too intimidated to watch like the rest of the UC stuff. And I've been telling him, you should just watch Gundam 00, like, because like it's on streaming really easily. It's 50 episodes. It's got nothing. You can totally watch it on its own. If you had to watch one other show before it, it would be Gundam 79. So like, yeah, it's so good. Obviously, if you're in this deep in the conversation, you've already seen it, so this isn't a recommendation, but just a note. Speaking of the innovators, we didn't talk about a new returner, though, and her relationship with Lock-On here, because that is a really compelling like arc of the season, I think, of that she is someone who doesn't like really know what she is, and like we're very aware, like they walk onto that place at Lagrange 3, and they got this purple-haired girl with them named a new returner, and I'm like, no, don't put her on the ship, you idiots! But they do, and of course they keep getting ambushed. And what's so compelling about it is that Lyle kind of figures it out before anyone else does, but he's also fallen in love with this girl, and he doesn't know what to do about it. And then, of course, we have to do the classic Gundam thing of where he almost talks her out of it, but then Ribbons takes over and Setsuna has no choice but to kill her and end this. And that episode is brutal and difficult, and one of the best done versions of that trope I think they've done.
Yeah, I particularly like how it's set up, at the beginning of that episode where Setsuna just straight up tells Lock-On, like, I'm going to kill her. Like, you don't do it, you can't, like, I will do it because it's going to have to be done. And then that happens at the very beginning of the episode, and then you go for most of the episode, and Setsuna's not even in that episode that much. And then right at the very end, Ribbons takes over, and then from out of nowhere, the 00 Gundam shoots up and shoots her, and flies away. And you get that last moment of them being, like, connected by the GN particles. Yeah, it's a really, really well done version of that scene.
It's so well done, and it's so... because they come so close.
Yeah.
Lyle does get through to her, and it's fine, and they're going to be okay. And then you realize, well, the threat was never a new returner. It was Ribbons Allmark.
Yes.
And he's the Satan. He's bad.
Yes,
bad.
he is the literal devil, or he is the metaphorical devil, I guess I should say.
Yes. Anyway, yes. So, okay. In terms of other characters, though, two we haven't talked about. I'm going to take the easy one first. Patrick Colasar.
Yes.
Our boy, the indestructible Patrick, who is paired this season with Katie Mannequin. I guess he was last season too, but she is his colonel, and he loves her. And another funny tweet where I kind of, I didn't put my foot in my mouth, but I like tweeted too early, was he in the, I think, penultimate episode has this moment when Katie and everyone comes back, and they're going to be destroyed, and then he jumps in at the last second and seemingly gets demolished, and he says, don't you touch my colonel, and then he says, I love you, mannequin-san, or whatever, and then he dies, and Katie is heartbroken, and I'm like, man, and I thought that was perfect. I'm like, that's the perfect way for Patrick to die. They have milked this joke for everything it's worth. It's great. I love this goofy-ass character who thinks he's Char, but he is not Char, and finally he accepts it, and he dies for his colonel, because that's the kind of good boy he is. And then they just full-on give him Gundam Seed Destiny plot armor and bring him back so he can marry Connie Mannequin.
Yeah, it's the fact that it's like, it's not just that he survives, it's that when you find out he survives is at their fucking wedding. It's so good. Yeah, it's such a great, it's like because at that point you've kept the joke running, you have to run it all the way through. He is the indestructible Patrick Colasar, right? Like they should make, there's like been vague talk about making eventually a 00 Gundam sequel. That talk happened relatively recently because it was a big anniversary of the show. Like 2 years ago, I guess, was the 10-year anniversary of the movie. And so if they do something else like set in this universe, it should be 1,000 years in the future, and somehow he's still alive. Because he just can't die. It's just like, I don't know how. He's just still alive. The indestructible Patrick Colasar.
Maybe we find out he was the original innovator all along.
Yep.
And he just has those powers. Oh, man, I love that character. I loved him from the beginning. They just the joke that starts in episode 1 and carries through to episode 50 is so well done. Mwah.
Yeah.
Perfect. And then Mr. Bushido, Graham Aker. What a character, man. They pulled that off. Holy cow.
Yeah, that is another one where recording the episode last time, it was very hard to never call him Mr. Bushido, because in my head, that's what the character's name is. Like, I have to sometimes look up what his real name is, Graham Aker, because he's fucking Mr. Bushido. And, like, one of the, I think, the biggest surprises for me in rewatching 00 Gundam is how little that character is in the show. Because in my head, he's, like, one of the main characters. He sets in his rival. Like, he's all over the place. Like, it's fucking Mr. Bushido. Just, like, and we talked about in Season 1 that he's not in Season 1. He doesn't have that much screen time. And in my head I was like, oh yeah, but just we wait until Season 2, and it's like, no, he maybe almost has less screen time in Season 2, but he just makes such a big impact on the viewer because it's just fucking Mr. Bushido.
He's so great. And that name, there's a moment like midway through the season where I think he meets Billy again. And Billy's like, oh, so they're calling you Mr. Bushido now. And he says, oh, I didn't ask to be called that. Bullshit! Bullshit, you don't like being called Mr. Bushido. That is like his happiest thing in the world, is that people have now called him Mr. Bushido, and he wears his goofy mask. Like, talking about like how the show like reconfigures Gundam tropes. I just love that this character is almost like a parody of Char, of like, first we have the whole origin story in season 1 of him falling in love with the Gundam and then getting injured, and then in season 2 he's got the mask. I mean, I also made the analogy on Twitter, and I think I'm 100% correct that he's basically the Phantom of the Opera but in Gundam, because he had a horrible injury, he has a crazy ass mask, he is in an unrequited love with someone else who he is, through repeated encounters, training to be better at their thing, so ultimately they can do it together. And by do it, I mean fight in mobile suits, but I also think just have sex. I think he does kind of want to fuck Setsuna, even though he doesn't know who Setsuna is. He wants to fuck the Gundam and whoever is in it. It is so good. And you say, like, oh, he's Setsuna's rival. He's not, though. Like, Setsuna doesn't even think about this guy. He wants to be Setsuna's rival. He wants to be that important, but he's really not. And, like, he could have such a massive impact on this universe because he is a supremely talented pilot. And he's a good guy deep down, I think, from what we saw in season 1. But he is so single-minded that he has no impact on this world whatsoever. Because all he wants is to have this big duel with the Gundam. He finally gets it. He loses. And Setsuna's, is basically like, this is pathetic. You could do so many things. You have to fight for something, and leaves. And that's it for Mr. Graham Acre. And it is a memorable arc. Although I say this is it, we also get the flashback of him fucking training in, like, Japan with an actual master and, like, standing under the waterfall with the water over his face. Oh, man. They knew what that character was and they went for it.
Yeah. I think there's something, like, particularly pointed about, and I'm saying this with completely self-consciously, about having the American dude become the guy who's, like, the samurai Bushido man, right? That it's like, it's not even like his culture, right? Like, it's like they don't go deep into it, but, like, the implication is it's through his relationship with Billy, who is, like, part American, part Japanese, like Billy Katagiri, whose father, or no, it's not his father, it's his uncle, is Homer Katagiri, which, what a great name. I love that they named that character Homer, who's the head of A-Laws, and he doesn't have, like, a lot of screen time, but he's the one who's kind of manipulating things, and you see him in that flashback kind of training Mr. Bushido. Who also Homer Katagiri, like, commits seppuku. You see that, like, in the epilogue at the end, that he follows through on the whole samurai thing. But yeah, having this guy who's, like, this American who's just, like, obsessed with this, like, Japanese shit. I self-identify with Mr. Bushido quite a bit in that regard. And I think it's one of the effective things about season 2, when we pointed out multiple times, like, they take these things that were more grounded in season 1 and heighten them. I think this is something that, like, again, I can see someone maybe, like, get kind of irked by how almost ridiculous the Mr. Bushido thing is if you really like the character in season 1. But to me, you take this character that over the course of season 1, he becomes more and more kind of consumed by this, like, symbolic representation within the story, that by the end of season 1, Graham Acre is less of a character and more of this representation of the violence that Setsuna has wreaked on the world, who comes in at the last second when Setsuna thinks he's victorious and knocks him down a peg, because it's like, I am like all the seeds of destruction you have planted throughout your life, like I am, or throughout the show, I am here. Like, all the people you have killed, the things you have done is here to, like, knock you back down to earth. And so then in season 2, he continues on that trajectory where he's, like, almost not even a human. Like, he's this, like, symbol of warfare for warfare's sake, of, like, fighting for honor and fighting for this sense of self-fulfillment, but not to exact change on the world. That is just this sort of cycle of vengeance and retribution that he knowingly puts on, right? He intentionally makes himself a symbol by becoming Mr. Bushido with the mask and the fucking samurai regalia and all that shit he puts on. Having fucking Billy make his mobile suits that are very cool, the Masurao and the Susanoo, named after Japanese mythological figures and looking like big crazy samurai armor, that also are like so flags. Much. Yeah, like, he puts all that on to become this symbol, that it's very appropriate that ultimately, because Setsuna has grown so much, what Mr. Bushido is can't impact Setsuna, because he represents this sort of, like, closed loop of an ideology that cannot, as you point out, Jonathan, it can't affect anything or do anything. And Setsuna has grown beyond that, right? Setsuna has grown beyond his sort of traumas and needing to be sort of consumed by this cycle of violence and this history of violence he's committed, because he's no longer enacting violence to enact violence. He's enacting violence in order to create room for change, and that's what he's trying to do. And that's something that Mr. Bushido cannot do because it's not what he is. And so I think that very like symbolic construction of a character is very effective in a narrative sense, and it's just he's also just fucking cool. Like the moment he flies in and he turns on the fucking Trans Am, it's the first time any mobile suit other than our main Gundams have used that. That's just a fucking fuck yeah, Mr. Bushido moment that just makes you very hype.
Yeah, it's like it's got all this thematic richness we're talking about. It's also just fun.
Yeah,
and like Gundam should be fun on a certain level, and this is fun because again they fucking get it. So I think that's pretty much all the characters. Is there anyone we haven't touched on you wanted to?
The last one I want to touch on is Wan Lumi, because she like doesn't have a huge role like in season 2. She's definitely more in season 1. But I really like where they go with that character and how she kind of represents this like upper class rich motherfucker who is like just dissatisfied with their life because they're so rich and just want to use that money to kind of fuck around and pretend like they're doing something big and important, but really it's just like, I just want to see like change in the world, so I'll give some money to the celestial being, I'll give some money to Ribbons Allmark and whatever. And it's like, really, she doesn't know what the fuck she's doing. It's just like she is this like, in the way that Mr. Bushido is like war incarnate, she is the privilege incarnate. And it's very satisfying to see her get knocked down a peg. And, you know, it's like, it's sad that she has to die, but also that character really fucking had to die in season 2.
Yeah, she gets a little bit of redemption, I think, because she does ultimately make the choice to make her life like worth something in giving Setsuna the Veda coordinates. So she does have that moment, and I thought that was powerful because the really getting knocked down a peg is watching her brother die. Yeah. And realizing she can be touched that way. And then she does die, and that is the point in the series where you're in cleanup mode, where like you're reaching the end because they're just taking pieces off the board. Every Gundam show gets to that point. And except for Seed Destiny, because everyone lives no matter what. But yeah, it's I agree. I think she's an interesting character and a very like, even if it's minor, an important part of the tapestry they're weaving here.
Yeah, and I just realized there's another pretty major character we haven't talked about, which is Marina. I don't think we've hit on.
Yeah, that would be a major character. I mean, one of the things this is another one where I assume there's more in the movie, but I like that it doesn't go in the exact archetypal direction you're expecting. This does not end with her and Setsuna like settling down a la, Lacus and Kira in Seed or something. Or even like kind of what you see at the end of Gundam Wing. They do kind of wind up going their separate ways, but they are always in some kind of conversation with each other. And they even do the mirroring in this season ends with a letter from her to Setsuna trying to kind of say what she thinks about the world. And she is the one character who is sort of committed to a level of pacifism through the entire show. But I don't think it's a hopeful pacifism. It's not a eyes shut to the world pacifism. It is it's hard to explain. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, because I think on one level I was a little disappointed to see her kind of relegated to the caretaker role with the kids, but also they do a lot of interesting thematic stuff with that, and like the Song of Peace they make becomes the second end theme. There's a lot going on there.
Yeah, no, so I think the thing I like with Marina and Setsuna, I mean, one of the main things is that they are not really a romantic pairing. Right. And I like the show, like, makes that very explicit up front in season 2, where early on in the season, they rescue Marina and she's like with the Ptolemaeus for a number of episodes. And when she's there, you have Milena comes into the cafeteria or whatever. It just pokes her head in and says, "So are you two dating?" And they both immediately deadpan just look at her and say, "Nope." And it's like, that's just true. Like, that's not, and it's the same thing that Setsuna reaffirms to Felt at the end of the season. Is like, that's not the kind of relationship that they have. It's this like, I think it's this mutual fascination with each other, because I think they both see like this opposite in one another, right? But they're both striving for the same thing and taking opposite paths, and realize that both of them are necessary, right? That is both Setsuna, and one of the big lessons Setsuna learns over season 2 is that destruction doesn't accomplish anything on its own, but things can be created within destruction, right? That's one of like the main, like, I think thesis statements of the series is, and it's a rejection of the like true pacifism in something like Gundam Wing, which would say that destruction is always bad. And Double O Gundam is saying, no, things are born through destruction. Like, you cannot create something from nothing, and sometimes you need to clear out the forest for new plants to grow, right? Like, destruction serves a function, and you need to fight in order to create change. But at the same time, you do also need people who are trying to affect that change, not just through violence, but through like cultural means, which is and I think that the show's not perfect at it with Marina, and I also have some frustrations with the like relegating her to this like caretaker role with the children. But I think like the sentiment of what they're doing with the song and the way it's being spread, I think it's good that they don't go like too hammy with it, but just like sort of give this indication of like, also you do need politics and you need culture to motivate and maintain that change, and that's something that Setsuna can't do. So it's like she needs Setsuna in order to like level the playing field and create this destruction that can motivate change. But then you need people in the rubble to create the political and cultural shifts that need for that change to be meaningful in the future.
It's why she can't pick up the gun near the end of the series, because that's not her role, and she knows it, and she knows, like, I don't think she's naive about it. I think she knows she could die or something, right? But she also knows that, like, if she is going to do what the world needs her to do, she can't be the person who takes the path of destruction, ultimately, you know? And it's it's a smart side of the show. I think the moment where it all comes together best for me is the one where I think it's Setsuna has just been fighting Ali Al-Sachez, and the song comes through, and everyone hears on the radio, he's about to kill her, or him actually, right? And he hears the song, and then he just kind of breaks down and he says, I don't know what I'm fighting for anymore. And that really like sparks something in him, and that's where after that is when he gets the whole idea of you have to change and you have to grow, and like I'm going to become something new. And I think that's a really key moment, because that is his turn from this destruction is necessary and righteous to, well, but something can be built out of it. There can be something new here. There can be a change, and there can, and that's what the show's about.
Yeah, it's the core ideological shift of season 2, which is that celestial being in season 1 is using violence to maintain a stalemate within the world, right? It's not trying to affect any real change. It's trying to prevent war and violence from occurring. And that's what the violence they wreak does. In season 2, Setsuna's perspective changes, and it's like, well, at the end of the day, that's kind of where Mr. Bushido comes from, right? Because that's kind of also, in some ways, violence for violence's sake. Like, it's not trying to change anything or create something new. So, like, the ideological shift that Setsuna needs to make is to motivate that destruction through this lens of creation, rather than it, like, destruction itself to be the end goal, which is basically what it was in season 1.
And I mean, the show is so well structured, because season 1, episode 1, the premiere of the whole show, is you get the video from Olia Schoenberg of this is what celestial being is. And then the very, very end of season 2, the series finale, is Setsuna in that last montage kind of laying out a new vision of what celestial being is, which is like, we're here if we're needed as this piece is created, because this is a being that is needed. And I really love that you see that transformation in full.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I feel like we should just talk about the last couple episodes and sort of the finale of this whole thing. And of course, the big moment that I think we probably need to break down, and kind of the climax of the series really, is Setsuna's awakening as an innovator within the Double O Gundam, and this wave of understanding that sends her at the battlefield, which is now the second time, I will argue, that they have adapted in Gundam the Amuro dies ending of the Yoshiyuki Tomino novel. We saw that in Unicorn Gundam. The finale has that scene with the Play 12, whatever her actual name is in that show, but that's who she is, dies, and like you get this thing that goes out to everyone. But this one is honestly a pretty direct adaptation of the idea in Yoshiyuki Tomino's novelization of the original Mobile Suit Gundam, which, if you don't know, ends with, this isn't the very ending, but in the battle at Abaoku, Amuro is killed by basically a stray shot, but he has this big new type flash that sends out, and in the novel he goes like character to character on that battlefield. You start with Char, and because he's the closest, and you kind of go out from there. And they all have some flash from Amuro that tells them something that helps sort of bring the battle to a close. And they also all know in that Amuro has died. And it's a beautiful, stunning scene that I think, even though it's never been animated, it hangs over a lot of Gundam. We talked about it with Unicorn, but here, like, it's not that Setsuna dies. It's actually the opposite. He ascends, kind of. But it's very similar in this thing of then it sends out, and then we go to all the characters, and none of them can, like, exactly vocalize what's going on, but they suddenly have this expanded understanding. And it brings the battle to sort of a close, in a way, of Billy no longer wants to kill Sumeragi, and you have Andre is finally willing to listen to Marie. And a lot of things are sort of defused, and the battle winds up ending not with, like, big explosions, at least at that stage, you're going to have to fight with ribbons, but with this, like, wave of understanding sort of diffusing things and giving people direction. And it is really beautifully done, and I think a really smart reading of what Tomino did in that novel.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the kind of main thrust of the second half of season 2, sort of like the final core of the show, which is Setsuna has made that choice after the confrontation with Ali Alsaces to become change, and then he starts becoming, the innovator. And I just love how they represent all that stuff, both in the writing and visually. This is where I think some, like, the most gorgeous animation is, where they get a bit more stylized with stuff. I think this is where they use the aesthetic of the green particles, the GN particles, so effectively, because it's, like, so thick. But the image of the, like, infinity symbol, the 2 O's, that is, like, the icon of the show, projecting from the back of the 00 Gundam, which is one of the best Gundam designs ever, is so gorgeous. And it's sweeping through, and it happens multiple times throughout the season, like, sweeping through and connecting different people. I think it's just, like, visually so powerful, and that iconography of, like, infinity, I think is very evocative. And then, yeah, it just hits on this, like, new type thing that I think oftentimes gets lost when Gundam does the new type stuff, of its core purpose of transcending physical boundaries and melding people together. And one of, like, the sort of pseudoscientific conceits in 00 Gundam that I think makes it, like, tinges it slightly differently, that makes it work better for me, is that it's all motivated through, like, vaguely through quantum physics. So that's where they, like, talk about that the 00 Gundam quantizes, and the, like, quantum brain particles that the super soldiers and the innovators have. All of that is, like, it's really hitting on this idea of, in quantum physics, there's a concept called quantum entanglement, whereby 2 different particles on a quantum level can become entangled, meaning that effectively, no matter what physical space or physical distance those particles occupy, something that happens to one particle will be reflected in the other particle as well. This is a real-world scientific phenomenon, meaning that if you were to move one of the particles or affect it in some way, or to, like, give it energy, something like that, that change would be reflected in the other particle, no matter the distance. And that's kind of what happens here, is people become melded or entangled on a quantum level and able to understand other people's thoughts and lived experiences. And that's how Setsuna is connecting people. And I like the, like, again, it's very pseudoscience. It's like, that would not actually work. But, like, the vague idea of it and the conceit of it, I think, is something that keeps it fresh. And it, like, tinges a lot of how they represent the new type or innovator stuff throughout the whole show. That also culminates in, I think, one of the coolest thing a Gundam has ever done. That's, like, the ultimate, like, zenith of what Setsuna is able to achieve, where he quantizes the 00 Gundam, breaks it into particles, moves it, and then reassembles it at a different location, which he does twice in the series, and is one of the fucking coolest things ever. Yes. As, like, the concept of a new type power. It's basically like Neo in the Matrix, right? He has so full control over himself and everything that he is able to break himself apart and put himself back together. And it is just such a great visualization and conceit of what that idea of the innovator is, of moving to this, like, other plane of existence, and how it, like, works within the world of Gundam. It's very cool.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. It's some of the animation around that is just stunning. It's sort of the mirror image of what we get in season 1 when Nina sets off like the red GN particles, and it like blankets half of the fucking planet Earth.
Yeah.
But you get it in space in the end here, and it's just gorgeous animation. And like a really, as this is true of the whole show, really good uses of digital animation and the possibilities that like these are things you just couldn't do in past Gundam by hand. It's like it would be impossible. And so what they're doing is they're really like some of these ideas I feel like are coming out of the aesthetic possibilities of what you can do with CG assisted animation. And there's some really cool stuff with that.
Yeah, it's a phenomenal ending. It is one of like my all-time favorite new type moments in the franchise, and it is because it does hit on a little bit more of that kind of like inscrutability or like unknowability of what new types are in the original Gundam that is also like tinged with all like the 70s aesthetic. Here it's not quite as 70s, but I think it hits on a similar like feel and mood to me.
Absolutely. And, you know, all of that happens in the penultimate episode. Yep. So the finale, they actually make room for the finale to be able to kind of breathe in a way Gundam finales often don't.
Yeah.
It's kind of got that turn A structure where the second half is sort of all wrap up. It is also, though, and I find this fucking hilarious, so Seiji Mizushima, the director of this, is also the director of Full Metal Alchemist, which would have been the show he did before this. Mm-hmm. The original Full Metal Alchemist that is partially based on the manga, but then goes in a different direction. And this finale is almost to a T identical in structure to the Full Metal Alchemist finale, for those who have seen it, of like the second half, you have sort of this big culmination and this climax, and in Full Metal Alchemist, it is Edward Elric is about to do this human transmutation, and we're not sure where that's going to leave him, and then we fade to white and go into the future like 4 months, and then we see this big closing montage of where everyone is, and then finally we go back to Ed, and that's where the series ends, on kind of an ambiguous note. And in 00 Gundam, it is Setsuna is going, fighting with ribbons, and they're coming at each other, and we don't actually see the finishing blow. We go fade to white, and then we roll credits, and we have this big montage, and then we go back to Setsuna at the end. And it's kind of the same for both of those, and then both of them are identically structured in that there's also a sequel movie that is also a series finale, and there are some things that are sort of left unfinished in the show. So Mizushima kind of did the same thing here twice, which I think works in both shows. I will still defend the original Full Metal Alchemist just because it's not the manga doesn't mean it isn't good. But yes, I mean, obviously there are some things, like there are all the hints about alien life, and that is where we're headed, and I do know that is roughly the premise of the movie, is it's kind of a first contact story, and that is sort of what they're seeding here in the closing episodes is where we have left to go. But it is still it's same with Full Metal Alchemist. If there were no movie, this would still be, I think, a very satisfying finale, even though you can feel that there's a little more to do.
Yeah, no, definitely, because like the whole concept of the Schuenberg plan of preparing for the conversations or the dialogue to come, which is a very good, I just love that phrase, particularly how it's structured in Japanese, just sounds very cool. But yeah, that Schuenberg's like planning or designing for humanity to be able to move to that next step. And so yes, like the alien stuff is a part of what happens in the movie. But it is within the context of the show itself. It is just also, another way of realizing the new type idea from classic Gundam of that it is about growing beyond the Earth, right? And his concern is when people move out into space, we cannot bring the like baggage that we have from this phase of our history out there in space, because what could happen? And like some of that is alien stuff, but some of that is just space colonies, and Gundam happens, and we blow each other up and we kill each other in space wars. And it feels like that is part of what it's saying, is like, before we do that, before we go out into space, before we stretch out in that way, we have to resolve it now, not then, not wait, but do it now. That kind of feels like that's what it's arguing for in that finale. Yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong, there is no other Gundam that touches on alien life, right?
I refuse to comment.
Okay. There's definitely not up until now. I just didn't know if there were any in the future that do.
We will readdress that question in the future. It's a complicated answer.
It's a complicated answer. I'm fine with that. All right. I guess the iron-blooded orphans are Martians, because they are iron-blooded.
Yes.
They're born on Mars.
Exactly.
That's all I know about that show, is that because you explained this to me, why it's called Iron-Blooded Orphans.
Yeah, I don't think I ever told you that. Yeah, in season 2 they all get green skin, so they become Martians. Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Yeah, and the main one is Martian Manhunter, and it's the greatest crossover of all time.
Exactly.
All right. What else to say about Gundam 00? We haven't talked about this batch of theme songs yet.
Yeah, that's where I wanted to go because the fucking 00 Gundam has the best fucking theme music. Oh my god.
There is one I didn't really like,
Which
but
one?
they went. I don't like the last opening.
I like the Beyond the Tears or whatever, Nami no Nobuko. I like that one.
It's not that I dislike it. It feels a little out of place tonally and everything to me. But I will say, 7 out of 8 of the songs, adding up the openings and the endings, I adore, and that is a really, really high percentage. And that last song, the second opening to season 2, I don't hate it as a song. I just didn't really like it in context. So that is still a really, really high bar they cleared.
Oh no, there's something I like about it, particularly when you get into that last stretch of episodes where it is a more like it's the song is called Beyond the Tears, so it's like it is intentionally a much more hopeful song, and I think that and I think that when you get to the end of the show, and maybe it's like part of like rewatching it, it feels very appropriate to me for the ending of 00 Gundam, which like overall within the schema of Gundam has one of the most positive, like uplifting endings of any Gundam show. Like it's
very true.
Lots of people die, but it has this very like happy, like hopeful feeling when you're left with it, and I feel like that song kind of leaves you with that.
That's fair. I think it's just a taste thing. It's again, I don't think it's bad. I'm just saying for me, it didn't work. The first opening, I fucking adore. That one is so cool. There's a guitar lick in that's like going on in the background for most of it that is out of this world good. I think that one's great.
Yeah, that's a great song, and that one's weird where I have like a Spotify playlist of my favorite like anime songs basically, and that's been on there forever. And so it had been a very, very long time since I had heard the like 90-second TV edit, and it was like very distracting to me every time. It's like, oh, it's about to go into the second part of the chorus, and it's like, oh wait, no, it went to the bridge. Oh my god. Like it works fine, but it is something where it's like if you've heard a song like hundreds of times one way and then you hear like the edited version, it's like if you hear a radio edit version of a song that takes out the curse words or something, it's very jarring. But yes, it's a great song. Overworld, which is the band that plays that, I like that band quite a lot.
And then both endings, I really like Prototype Boy. I know it's just called Prototype, but it's Prototype Boy in my mind.
Yeah.
That one, that is a great song, and the like the chanting at the beginning and end of it is crazy good. And then I think the last song, which is we hear the lyrics of it several episodes before we actually get that ending because it's the Marina and the Kids song, but now it's this like J-pop version of it. That's a really cool move they make.
Yeah, one thing I particularly like is I feel like they up their game in season 2 from the let's do the like start playing the ending song a little bit before the ending credits begin to give that like cool transition, which we started talking about with Gundam Seed. And here they up it by having for both Prototype and Trust You, which is the second ending song. Both of them have about 5 or 6 different versions that will play depending on the episode that have different parts transition in. So sometimes Prototype will have the part play, and then sometimes it will just go into a non-instrumental accompanied like lyric version.
Call that acapella.
Yes, just the acapella. And then I think in particular the one I love is with Trust You. There's a couple of episodes. The main one they do it for is the Anya Returner Dies episode, where they just transition to that with starting from the chorus with acapella, with the singer just belting out the words "I love you, I trust you," as you just watched his like Lock-On's love die. It is a really powerful moment. Like I think they use those ending song transitions incredibly all throughout season 2.
Absolutely. I think for a full 50 episode 4-core anime with 8 openings and endings, this is about as good as it could possibly get, right? Like, it's hard to go 7 or 8 for 8, however you feel. That's a really good batting average.
Yeah, they're all great songs. I just think like a bunch of the insert songs are also fantastic.
Yep.
That it's just a really good selection of music. And then it does one of my other favorite long-running anime things in modern anime, which is it ends the last episode by playing the opening theme from the first core. That's the one that everyone always identifies the opening theme from the first opening theme of the show most strongly with that show. So it brings Daybreak's Bell back for like the last 90 seconds of the show while it's playing over the epilogue, which is always a really great, like, we're wrapping it up, boys kind of feel.
Yeah, you got to do it. All of that is great. They also structurally change things a little bit in that every episode has something after the credits. Mm-hmm. So they do the credits, and then they have like a minute or two of more material. It's I wouldn't call it a tag because it is essential stuff. It's not a teaser. And then they go into the next episode preview, which has a sick guitar beat under it this season. Is that a common thing that modern anime does, where they just have a full scene after the credits every week?
It's pretty common, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's one of the reasons why you never skip the ending theme, because I think I talked about this one time on the podcast several years ago, where I forget what I was watching, but I was watching something, and I skipped to the next episode without going through the full ending theme, because the thing that fucks you is some shows don't do it consistently. If it does it consistently, it's fine. It's great. Like, sometimes it can be very cool, because it's a good mood break to have that ending theme, and then you get this next little extra scene at the end. But then I watched some show where it didn't do it very often, and then it was like the penultimate episode did have it at the end. And so, like, at the end of the penultimate episode before the credits, it was a happy ending of that episode. Then the credits happen. Then apparently there's a scene after the credits where the fucking planet explodes because, like, the new, like, a real antagonist shows up. And I watch the next episode. It's like, the planet's gone. And I'm like, how did this even happen? Oh, it was Tenchi Muyo. That's what the fuck it was. It was one of those Tenchi Muyo shows. It was like, how did the fucking planet blow up? And then I had to go back and rewatch the end of the last episode. It's like, what the fuck did I miss?
That is like the ultimate parody of anime. I love it. Of like, before the credits, everyone's happy. After the credits, the planet explodes.
Yes, it was like literally the planet was gone. It's like, what the fuck?
Oh my god.
Yeah, so there are definitely a couple of episodes of season 2 where it's like, if you didn't watch through that extra scene at the end of the credits, you would be very confused at the beginning of the next episode.
Yeah, there's great stuff, and they do it consistently. So, I just don't think I ever skipped the end credits. I just watched it.
And because the end credit songs are always good, it's always just fun to listen to them. And the animations are good. I particularly like the animation for Trust You, which is like everyone's jackets like tied together and holding on and like representing the people. Yeah. It's a very good kind of music video.
So good. One of the images from that is actually our cover image. If you're watching this on YouTube, it's the photo I have here. It's of the Gundam covered in flowers.
Yes.
It's very good stuff. Anyway, yeah, obviously if we have more thoughts on 00, we can clearly bring them up next time because we've got one more of these. But just as a TV show, and we'll see how the movie brings it up or down or wherever for me, this is one of the best Gundam shows. I did a little tier ranking of Gundam for me because I've been thinking about this a while, and I think you and I have agreed for a while that the S top tippity tier of Gundam is Turn A, 79, and War in the Pocket. I have to say, I need to think on it more. 00 might be in that tier for me. I think it might be that good.
I don't think I'd quite put it in that tier, but it is like the tier below it, for sure. Like it is, yeah. Like to me, like Mobile Suit Gundam and Turn A in particular, I think are relatively untouchable. But this is like right at the top of the heap, right below those, because 00 Gundam is phenomenally good.
Phenomenally good, and I think part of it is just for me how much it's when I look at those ones in like that top tier for me, they're all so different from one another. Mm-hmm. And this one also just so stands on its own as its own work that does not it is in conversation with a lot of other Gundam things, but it doesn't feel indebted to them in the way or like weighed down with continuity or any of that. It's perfect. It's such a good show.
Yeah.
And obviously we're in agreement on that. The exact tier, that doesn't really matter. But we both love this one.
Yeah, no, this was some of the most fun I've had rewatching one of these shows. Yeah, because I remembered liking it so much, but again, at this point, it's been long enough since I've watched some of these shows that I only saw once that like a lot of the details were gone. So some of the stuff, particularly with Saji in season 2, was like, oh my god, right? This show is so good. Holy shit.
Yeah. This is why we do this show, right, yes. Sean?
Yeah, because Gundam has a couple of maybe not great shows in there, but most of them are like stupidly good. It is crazy. Yes. The overall batting average of quality of Gundam shows is ridiculous. Yeah. And
then you get one of these really just transcendental ones, and it's like you fall in love all over again, you know?
Yep.
That's certainly how I felt. So one more Gundam 00 episode, though, because we have the movie Awakening of the Trailblazer. Not Awakening. Awakening.
Yep.
And I am very excited. I got my Blu-ray. I am ready. I am excited to see that movie. And that will be the wrap-up for this sort of phase of Gundam, and then we'll move on. But one more on 00, the movie.
Jonathan, the childhood of humanity has ended, and it is time for a Trailblazer to be awaked.